Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Highway Hall, Passenger of Blood. I was halfway through the longest haul of my career, winding down a stretch of highway that felt like it was carved out just to test patience. It was the kind of evening where everything felt routine, and that was exactly what I needed. The rake was loaded with lumber, bound for a mill 3 states over. I'd been on the road for nearly 10 hours, and the cab was my world, my sanctuary, really. The small radio played soft country tunes low enough not to intrude, and the scent of stale coffee mingled with leather seats and the faint hint of pine from the dashboard air freshener. I liked that smell. It reminded me of home, even when I was miles away. About 20 miles out from the last tiny town, one of those places so small it barely makes a blip on the map, I spotted him. A man standing on the shoulder, thumb out, coat pulled tight against the chill creeping in as the daylight faded. At first, I almost passed him by. Most drivers did. Hitchhikers out here were rare, and usually not worth the risk. But something about the guy caught my eye. His face was gaunt, sunken cheeks and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in days. He didn't wave or shout, just stood there, almost like he was waiting for me specifically. I pulled over, chilling the engine with a soft grunt. The sudden quiet in the cab was sharper than I expected. The man climbed up into the passenger seat without a word, dropping his backpack on the floor with a thud. I glanced over, trying to read him. "Thanks," he said, voice low, almost hoarse. "I've been walking for hours." I nodded, finger brushing the ignition. "Where are you headed?" He hesitated, eyes flicking out the window. "Anywhere but here," he said finally. That was about as much as I got. The highway stretched out in front of us, empty and darkening fast. I flicked the headlights back on and shifted into gear, the rig lurching forward slowly. The man didn't say much after that, just stared ahead, jaw clenched tight, like he was holding back a storm. I tried to keep the conversation light, but he shut down every attempt. I figured he was just scared, or maybe running from something. I've picked up my share of people over the years, some looking for a fresh start, others just trying to get out of trouble. Most kept to themselves. I wasn't about to pry. The miles rolled by, and the night grew colder. Somewhere around the 2-hour mark, I reached over to offer him a bottle of water from the console. His hands were shaking when he took it, fingers white around the plastic. That's when I first noticed the faint smell: iron, sharp and metallic, barely there but unmistakable. I thought maybe he'd been working with something messy or been hurt. I glanced down and caught sight of a dark stain on his sleeve. I asked if he was okay, but he just shook his head, eyes darting to the rearview mirror like he was watching something behind me. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. I kept my eyes on the road, heart rate nudging higher than usual. Something about the whole situation felt off, like a knot tightening in my gut. We passed a rest stop about 15 minutes later, and I figured maybe a break would help. I pulled in, the rake's tires crunching on gravel. The man didn't say a word but climbed out quickly, pulling his coat tighter around him. I watched as he disappeared toward the dimly lit restroom building, the glow from the overhead lights casting jagged shadows. I waited for what felt like 10 minutes, then 15, but he didn't come back. I called out his name, though I didn't know it, and got nothing but silence in return. At first, I thought maybe he'd gone off to find a phone or a payphone to call someone. But when I got out to check the cab, the driver's door was locked, and the passenger door was wide open. No sign of him anywhere. I stepped inside, the cab suddenly feeling colder than the night air outside. That's when I saw it. A smear of dark red, streaked across the dashboard and the passenger seat. Fresh blood, thick and sticky. It wasn't a small spot, either. It looked like someone had been bleeding heavily, their hand or arm dragging against the leather. My hands trembled as I grabbed a flashlight from the glove box, scanning every corner of the cab. Nothing else. No sign of a struggle, no dropped belongings, no footprints inside the rig. Just the blood and an empty seat. I checked the floorboards, the seat belts, even under the seats. No sign of him. The rig sat quiet except for the faint hum of the engine cooling down. I locked the doors and sat back behind the wheel, the weight of the silence pressing down harder than any night I'd driven alone before. I didn't know where he'd gone or why he'd vanished like that. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going anywhere until I figured it out. The streetlights flickered outside, casting long shadows through the cracked windshield. My fingers drummed restlessly on the steering wheel as I tried to piece together the puzzle. Was he taken? Had he left willingly? The unanswered questions gnawed at me, each one sharper than the last. I reached for my phone, hoping for a signal or a message, anything, but the screen stayed stubbornly blank. Time was slipping away, and whatever had happened out there wasn't done with me yet. I didn't sleep much that night. When morning finally broke, pale and gray, I forced myself to get out of the cab. The air was cold and damp, clinging to my skin in an uncomfortable way. I walked around the rig, looking for anything I might have missed in the dark. The restroom building was empty, its windows fogged and grimy. Not a soul was around. I called out again, but my voice only echoed back to me, swallowed by the open expanse of the rest stop. I checked my phone once more. Still no signal. Somewhere out here in the middle of nowhere, with no way to call for help, I was on my own. I went back inside and wiped down the blood with some paper towels I found in the cab. It was stubborn, smeared deep into the leather. The thought of whoever it belonged to, maybe the hitchhiker, bleeding inside my truck made my stomach turn. More than that, it raised the question: why had he bled? And why had he left no other trace? I decided I needed to find out more about the area, figure out if anyone else had seen him or if there were cameras anywhere. But first, I had to move the truck. Sitting here all day wasn't going to help me solve anything, and I needed to get to the next town for supplies and a signal. I started the engine, the low rumble filling the cab with tense energy. As I shifted into gear, I noticed something else: an envelope tucked under the driver's seat. I hadn't seen it before. My hands were still shaky as I pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, the edges worn and creased, with a hastily scrawled message. Don't trust anyone. They're watching. Find the old gas station by mile marker 47. No signature, no explanation. My heart pounded harder. Who had left this? The hitchhiker? Or someone else entirely? I pulled out my map and found mile marker 47. It wasn't far from here, just down the highway, past a bend where the road narrowed and the trees grew thicker. An old gas station? I didn't remember passing one, but that stretch of highway was remote and little traveled. The thought of going there filled me with unease, but I knew I had no choice. If there was a chance to uncover what was happening, what had happened to the hitchhiker, I had to take it. I locked the cab and started walking toward the highway. The sun was beginning to climb, but the shadows still clung to the edges of the trees. I kept my eyes peeled, every rustle or crack of a branch making me jump. About a half-mile down the road, I spotted the gas station. It looked abandoned, its pumps rusted and peeling, the windows grimy and cracked. The faded sign creaked in the wind, advertising a brand long gone. I hesitated at the edge of the gravel lot, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Then I saw it, fresh tire tracks leading up to the pumps, dirt displaced and still damp. Someone had been here recently. I approached cautiously, my breath shallow. Inside, the floor was littered with debris, broken glass, empty cans, a few scattered papers. I picked up one of the papers and unfolded it. It was a receipt from a convenience store in the next town over, dated just 2 days ago. That meant someone was using this place as a stop, maybe even as a hideout. Upstairs, the old office door was ajar. I pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning. Inside, the room was dark and musty. I spotted a small pile of clothes and a backpack in the corner. I moved closer and found a notebook lying on top. Flipping through it, I saw page after page of indecipherable scribbles and crossed out words until one entry caught my eye. Seen him again today. Watching from the trees. He knows. Can't stay long. Must move. My heart skipped. Who was he? Who was watching? And why? I heard a sudden noise, a sharp snap from outside the building. I froze, listening. The wind shifted, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement in the tree line. Shadows shifting just beyond the edge of the clearing. I wasn't alone. I grabbed the notebook and slipped it into my jacket as quietly as I could. Back outside, the tracks were still there, but now I noticed something else, a single set of footprints leading away from the gas station into the woods. They were fresh, the mud still soft. I debated following them, but a cold dread washed over me. Whatever was out there wasn't going to be friendly. I turned back toward the highway, my mind racing. As I climbed back into the rig, I heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me. I whipped around, but there was nothing, just the empty lot and the rustling trees. I locked the doors and stared out into the growing dusk, the silence pressing in again. The hitchhiker was gone, but something else had taken his place, a presence that felt less desperate, more dangerous. And now, it was watching me. The engine roared to life, breaking the heavy quiet, but I didn't dare move just yet. Every shadow seemed to twist and stretch, reaching toward the cab like unseen fingers. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight, knuckles white, heart pounding in my ears. Then, a low, guttural growl echoed from the trees, freezing me in place. Whatever lurked out there wasn't content to just watch anymore, it was closing in. The headlights flickered, casting brief glimpses of snarling eyes between the branches. The miles dragged on endlessly beneath my wheels, a never-ending ribbon of asphalt swallowed by shadows. I kept the doors locked, the windows up, and the lights dimmed low. Every shadow, every rustling leaf outside the windshield made my skin crawl. I stared hard at the notebook in my lap, the strange scribbles still gnawing at my mind. Who was he? Who was watching? And why had the hitchhiker vanished without a trace? Morning came slow and gray, the sky pressed low with thick clouds. I forced myself to start the engine and pull back onto the highway, but something inside me felt different. The hitchhiker's disappearance wasn't just strange, it was dangerous. And I wasn't sure I'd gotten away from it yet. I drove in silence for hours, the miles unspooling beneath me like a thread unraveling. The radio played softly, a dull murmur meant to fill the empty space, but my mind kept circling back to that notebook and those cryptic words. I kept glancing at the empty passenger seat, half expecting the man to materialize from the shadows. That's when I saw the blood. It was smeared across the inside of the cab door, dark and sticky against the metal frame. At first, I thought it was rust or some kind of grease, but the color was unmistakable, deep red, fresh. My stomach clenched. I wiped at it with my sleeve, but it didn't come off. The smell hit me next, coppery, sharp, and unmistakably human. I checked the floor, the seatbelt, the dashboard. There were faint smudges on the floor mat too, like someone had dragged their hand or maybe tried to steady themselves. But there was no sign of the hitchhiker, no dropped items, no footprints inside the rig. Just that blood, smeared like a message. My mind raced. Was it his? Had he been hurt in the cab? Or had someone else come aboard after I wasn't looking? The thought that someone or something had been inside while I wasn't paying attention sent a cold spike down my spine. I pulled over at the next rest stop, heart hammering. The place was deserted except for a few trucks parked far off in the lot. I grabbed a cloth from the glove compartment and tried to clean the door, but the blood only smeared whiter. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I thought back to the notebook. The scribbled warning about being watched, about needing to move. Maybe it wasn't just paranoia after all. Maybe the hitchhiker was running from someone who had found him. Someone dangerous. And if that was true, then maybe picking him up had put me in their sights too. I pulled on my jacket and stepped out into the cold morning air. The highway stretched out behind me, empty and silent except for the occasional rumble of a distant semi. I scanned the tree line where I'd seen the footprints the day before. No sign of anyone now. Just the wind stirring the leaves. I was about to climb back into the cab when I noticed something on the ground near the edge of the pavement, a small, crumpled scrap of paper. I bent down and picked it up, my fingers trembling. It was a torn page from a notebook, handwriting scrawled across it in the same jagged script as the one I'd found in the gas station. But this message was clearer. Don't trust him. He's not what he seems. Watch the road. Keep moving. My breath caught. Who was him? The hitchhiker? Someone else? And why had this note been left here, just for me to find? A sudden noise made me spin around. A truck idled nearby, its engine rumbling low. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out, a tall figure, face obscured by a baseball cap pulled low. He looked at me with sharp eyes, the kind that don't miss a thing. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said, voice calm but carrying an edge that set my teeth on edge. I swallowed hard. Who are you? He didn't answer. Instead, he nodded toward my rig. You're mixed up in something bigger than you realize. That hitchhiker, he wasn't just lost. He was running. Running from what? The man's gaze flicked to the highway, then back to me. From people who don't forget. People who make sure you pay for crossing them. My heart pounded louder. I just gave him a ride. I don't know anything else. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. That's what they want you to think. But you're already in it. Before I could ask more, he pulled something from his pocket, a small, folded photograph. He handed it to me without a word. I unfolded it carefully. The image was grainy, black and white, the hitchhiker standing next to a man I didn't recognize, both looking tense, caught in a moment that felt like a trap. Recognize him? The stranger asked. I shook my head, but my mind was racing. The hitchhiker hadn't been just some desperate traveler. He had history. And now, it seemed, so did I. The man nodded slowly, then turned without another word and disappeared toward his truck. I stood there, the photo trembling in my hands. The rig behind me felt less like a refuge and more like a cage. I was no longer just a driver on a lonely road. I was a player in a game I hadn't asked to join, one where the stakes were life and death. And somewhere out there, the people watching were closing in. My heartbeat quickened as the horizon darkened, shadows stretching like silent threats. The night crept in faster than I expected, swallowing the last hues of twilight whole. I knew I was running out of time. The stranger's words echoed in my mind, people who don't forget. People who make sure you pay for crossing them. I tried to shake off the chill spreading through me, but the rig no longer felt like a sanctuary. It was a trap. A cage. And somewhere out there, the hunters were closing in. I decided I had to move, to get off this godforsaken stretch of highway. but the rig had other ideas. When I tried to start the engine, the dashboard lights flickered and died. The cab fell into darkness, save for the faint glow from the instrument panel. I hit the ignition again, nothing but a laborious clicking. "No," I whispered, voice trembling. I was stranded. Completely. I grabbed my phone, but the screen was dead. No signal. No help. Just the endless black outside. Then I heard a soft thud from the back of the trailer. My heart slammed against my ribs. I reached for the flashlight in the glove compartment and clicked it on. The beam sliced through the dark, landing on the closed trailer door. Another thud. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. I grabbed the door handle and yanked. Locked. Of course. I cursed under my breath. That hitchhiker had vanished without a trace hours ago, but now, what if he was still here? Or worse, someone else? I pulled out the small box cutter I kept in the cab. If someone was in there, I needed to be ready. I circled the rig, flashlight sweeping over the gravel and scrub brush lining the highway. The night was unnervingly quiet. No wildlife, no distant engines, just the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then I noticed something: fresh tire tracks, not the usual worn grooves of my rig's tires, but smaller, muddier, and recent. They led from the highway to a patch of thick trees about 50 yards away. I followed, heart pounding, the flashlight beam chittering between branches. Halfway through the underbrush, I spotted a small clearing. My light caught on a crumpled piece of fabric tangled in the thorns. I knelt down and brushed it away. A dark stain soaked through the cloth. Blood. I swallowed hard, stomach twisting. I wasn't alone here. And someone was hurt. A noise from behind made me spin, a snapping branch, quick footsteps retreating into the woods. Wait! I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the night. I was chasing shadows. I returned to the rig, adrenaline giving me a false sense of courage. I climbed back into the cab and flicked on the interior light. That's when I saw it, the blood inside the rig. It smeared across the passenger door handle, a dark streak running down the edge of the seat. It was fresh, sticky, and unmistakable. My hands trembled as I reached out, touching the stain. It wasn't my blood. I knew that without thinking. Panic clawed at my chest. How had it gotten there? What had happened while I was outside? Had the hitchhiker returned? Had someone else been in my rig? I heard another noise, this time from the sleeper compartment behind me. The faint sound of breathing, ragged and shallow. I grabbed the flashlight and edged toward the small door. My fingers fumbled with the latch. The breathing stopped. I pulled the door open. Empty. I slammed it shut and leaned against the wall, chest heaving. Whoever was here had vanished again. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the dashboard, startling me. I grabbed it, one bar of signal. A message flashed on the screen. It was from an unknown number. Stop looking. You don't know what you've gotten into. I stared at the words, frozen. The rig felt colder now, the shadows deeper. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting. And I was running out of time to find out why. I had to keep moving. But the highway behind me was a trap, and the darkness ahead was no friend. And then, from the far edge of the clearing outside, a flashlight beam flicked on, slow, deliberate, and aimed straight at me. The beam cut through the night like a knife, slicing away the shadows but revealing nothing but empty trees swaying in the cold wind. I ducked behind the rusted frame of an old rig, heart hammering in my chest. Whoever was out there was playing a game, and I wasn't sure if they wanted to catch me or scare me into running blindly. The message still burned on the screen in my hand. Stop looking. You don't know what you've gotten into. What did that even mean? What had I stumbled upon? I tried to recall every step, every detail from the past few days, anything that could explain this sudden, suffocating feeling of being hunted. The flashlight flicked again, closer this time. Footsteps crunched softly on the gravel, slow and measured. There was no hesitation, no panic. Whoever approached knew exactly what they were doing. I pressed myself tighter against the cold metal, trying to steady my breathing. My mind raced. If I ran toward the highway, I'd be exposed. If I stayed put, I might be trapped. I needed a plan fast. The rig's shadow stretched long, and I noticed a narrow path leading deeper into the woods, almost hidden by underbrush. It was risky, but it was the only option that didn't lead straight into the flashlight's beam. Clutching my phone, I darted from my cover, sprinting toward the trees. The beam swung wildly, searching, and then I heard the voice, low, calm, but tinged with warning. You don't have to do this. Walk away, and no one gets hurt. I didn't stop. I plunged into the darkness, the forest swallowing me whole. The sound of footsteps followed, relentless and close behind. Behind the mask of night, I realized the rail chase was just beginning, and this time, I wasn't sure I'd make it out alive. The sun was barely up when I finally stumbled out of the woods, drenched in sweat and coated in mud, my lungs burning from the cold morning air. I'd spent the night running, hiding, trying to make sense of everything, why someone was after me, what the warning meant, and who the hitchhiker really was. But daylight had a way of stripping away the worst of fear, replacing it with a cold, hard clarity I wasn't sure I wanted. I knew I couldn't keep running. Not anymore. That morning, I called the local sheriff's office. My voice was hoarse, but I managed to explain the situation, the hitchhiker, the blood, the threatening messages. They promised to send someone out, but there was a long delay. The nearest deputy was almost an hour away, and I was alone, miles from civilization on a highway that felt like it was designed to swallow people whole. I sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel as if it could anchor me to reality. The cab smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and something coppery, blood, I guessed. I traced the smear on the dashboard with my fingertip, careful not to disturb it. No matter how hard I looked, there was no sign of where it had come from. No wounds, no discarded clothing, nothing to tell me if the hitchhiker was hurt or worse. The deputy arrived just before noon. He was a tall man with a kind face and a no-nonsense attitude. After I told him everything again, he examined the rig, took photos of the blood, and wrote down my statement. He asked if I recognized the hitchhiker or if anyone might want to harm me. I shook my head. No. I don't know who he was. He just showed up. Desperate, scared. Then he disappeared. The deputy frowned. Sometimes people get mixed up in things they don't understand. Could be trouble from the wrong crowd. You need to be careful. I nodded, but deep down I knew it was more than that. The messages, the flashlight in the woods, this wasn't random. Someone had been watching me, maybe even following me for days. The deputy left me with a warning to stay put until they could send more help. But as the afternoon dragged on, I realized waiting wasn't an option. I had to find out what had happened to that hitchhiker. Maybe he was the key to all of this. I drove back to the last gas station where I'd stopped before picking him up. It was a dusty, forgotten place with a flickering neon sign that buzzed overhead. The clerk was an older woman with tired eyes, but when I mentioned the hitchhiker, a flicker of recognition passed over her face. Yeah, she said cautiously. He came through a few days ago. Looked like he'd been running from someone. Asked for directions, but then changed his mind. Said he couldn't stop. Did he say where he was headed? No. Just that he needed to get far away. I pressed for more, but she shook her head. I told him to go to the county line. Said there was a shelter there. That was something. A shelter. I searched my phone and found the address, a small non-profit, mostly for runaways and people escaping dangerous situations. I decided to check it out. The shelter was quiet when I arrived, a low brick building with barred windows and a locked front door. I knocked, and a woman in her 40s opened up. When I explained who I was and why I was there, she hesitated, then let me in. Inside, the air smelled of bleach and coffee. A few people sat in the common room, eyes wary but polite. The woman led me to an office where a counselor was on the phone. She hung up and listened as I told my story. The counselor's face grew grave. We had someone matching that description. Came in late last night. Said he was in trouble, didn't want to talk much. Left this morning before anyone could get his full name. Did he say where he was going? No. But he mentioned a name, Miller. Said he was trying to get away from him. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Miller. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. I asked if the counselor could check their records, but there was nothing more to find. I left the shelter with no answers, but a heavier sense of responsibility. That hitchhiker was still out there, somewhere, and whatever he'd gotten mixed up in was dangerous, and it had found me. That night, I sat in the cab of my rig, the bloodstains still visible in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. I thought about the chase through the woods, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, the voice warning me to stop looking. I realized the threat wasn't just about me, it was about him, the hitchhiker, and whatever he was running from. I made a decision then. I couldn't just be a driver hauling loads across empty highways. I had to do something. I had to tell someone who could help, someone who could stop the cycle before it claimed more lives. I called the sheriff's office again and insisted they open a missing persons case. I gave them every detail I had, no matter how small. The deputy listened carefully this time, promised to follow up, and asked me to stay available. Over the next few days, I found myself looking at the road differently, not as a lonely stretch of asphalt, but as a thin thread connecting people and stories I barely understood. I was still scared, but the fear was different now. It was sharper, more focused. It was the fear that comes with knowing you've seen something real and terrible, and that you can't unsee it. I never heard from the hitchhiker again. The blood in the rig was never matched to any missing persons or local reports. But I kept the memory of him alive, a silent reminder that sometimes the real horror isn't in monsters or ghosts, but in the desperate, broken people trying to outrun their past. In the end, I changed. I stopped being just a driver and started paying attention to the strangers I met, to the signs I ignored, to the stories left untold. I learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to face the darkness head-on, even when all you want to do is run. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Story 2, Hidden Ward, Unearthing Asylum Terrors. The sun had just begun to lower behind the ragged line of trees when I found myself standing in front of the old Willow Creek Asylum. I wasn't a thrill seeker. I wasn't one to chase ghosts or local legends. I worked a quiet job as a medical records clerk at the city hospital, and my evenings were usually spent with a book or a podcast. But lately, after months of the same routine, I'd started to feel like I was sleepwalking through life. The asylum, with its dark history and whispered rumors, intrigued me more than I cared to admit. People in town said it had been abandoned for decades, left to rot after a fire supposedly took the lives of some of its patients. Others claimed that some of those patients were never really accounted for, that they'd simply vanished into the shadows of its corridors, forgotten by time and the law. None of it was confirmed, just stories passed down in hushed tones. I pulled my jacket tighter against the chill creeping in with the evening air and pushed open the rusted iron gate, the screech of its hinges echoing far too loudly in the stillness. The air inside the grounds was thick with the scent of damp earth and rot. My footsteps crunched on broken glass and scattered leaves as I made my way toward the main building. The front doors, once grand and imposing, now hung crooked on their hinges. I hesitated for a moment, my heart caught somewhere between curiosity and caution, then slipped inside. The darkness was immediate and nearly complete. I fumbled for my phone, switching on the flashlight, the beam cutting through decades of dust motes floating lazily in the stale air. The lobby was vast, with cracked tiles beneath my feet and a grand staircase that curled upward like a frozen scream. The silence was thick, broken only by the soft drip of water somewhere deep within the walls. I swallowed hard. This was no longer a building, but a tomb. I moved slowly, my light scanning peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and faded signs that once pointed toward therapy rooms and wards. I imagined the lives that had passed through here, the patients, the doctors, the nurses. What had they seen? What had they endured? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. As I explored, I noticed something odd, a faint draft wafting from behind a door near the back of the lobby. The door itself was unmarked, unlike the others, which bore faded labels like X-ray or records. I pressed my ear against it. There was no sound at first, just a distant drip of water and the creak of old wood settling. Then, almost imperceptibly, a soft scrape like a chair being moved. My breath caught. I pulled the door open with a slow, deliberate motion. It groaned, revealing a narrow hallway beyond, one I hadn't seen on any maps or guides I'd found online. The walls here were bare concrete, colder and more oppressive than the rest of the building. The flashlight flickered as I stepped inside, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move just beyond the edge of the beam. I stopped. "Hello?" My voice sounded strange in the enclosed space, too loud and too small all at once. No answer. Just silence. I pressed on, the floor uneven beneath my feet. The hallway ended in a heavy steel door, padlocked but with the lock broken and hanging uselessly to one side. Beyond it lay a room filled with metal tables, rusted instruments, and glass jars with cloudy liquid. I swallowed hard. This wasn't therapy. This was something else. Before I could process what I was seeing, a sound from behind me, a soft footstep, deliberate and slow. I whipped around, the flashlight beam swinging wildly, but there was nothing there. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed toward the door, the sense of being watched tightening around me like a noose. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the building was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew someone else was here, moving in the shadows. Watching. Waiting. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out why. The silence stretched taut again, broken only by the distant drip of water echoing through the empty corridors. I forced myself to steady my breathing, each inhale sharp and deliberate. There was no turning back now. I had to push forward, to uncover whatever secrets this place was hiding. Slowly, I edged past the doorway, the floor creaking softly beneath my weight, each sound amplified in the oppressive stillness. As I moved deeper into the labyrinthine hallways, the beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and faded photographs hanging crookedly on the walls. Faces stared back at me, smiling, yet haunting, and I wondered who they were, what stories had been left untold within these walls. A sudden chill swept past me, colder than the stale night air. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering, when a faint whisper drifted on the breeze, barely audible, yet unmistakable. It wasn't a word, more like a breath, a sigh carried on the wind. I froze, listening intently. The sound came again, closer this time, as if someone or something was right behind me. I swung the flashlight around, the beam catching a glint of movement just beyond the corner. Heart hammering, I took a cautious step forward, then another, drawn toward the glimmer like a moth to a flame. The hallway opened into a small room, its door hanging ajar. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something else, something sharp, metallic, lingering just beneath the surface. In the center of the room lay an overturned chair and scattered papers fluttering in the faint draft. My eyes were drawn to a notebook lying open on the floor, the pages yellowed and brittle. Kneeling, I reached out, the whisper still echoing softly around me. The handwriting was jagged, frantic in places, chronicling days marked by fear and desperation. And then, at the bottom of the last page, a chilling message: they are not alone. They watch through walls. We cannot escape. My breath caught. The shadows shifted again, just at the edge of the light. I wasn't alone here. I never had been. The weight of that final sentence pressed on me long after I tore my eyes away from the notebook. I stepped out of the small room, careful not to disturb the scattered papers, and closed the door behind me with a slow, deliberate motion. The corridor stretched ahead, dark and silent, yet the oppressive stillness seemed to thicken, as if the building itself were watching, waiting for me to slip up. My flashlight's beam quivered in my hand, the batteries barely holding out, but I forced myself forward, drawn by a mixture of morbid curiosity and the gnawing need to understand what I had stumbled into. The hallway twisted and turned in a confusing pattern, the plaster crumbling away in places to reveal rusted metal pipes and exposed wiring. Graffiti covered some walls, mostly crude messages and names scratched by past trespassers, but here and there, I noticed something more deliberate, faint marks carved into the wood paneling, almost like tally marks. I counted them quickly, 8 sets on this stretch, spaced irregularly, but all in the same rough style. Someone had been marking days, or maybe victims. The thought made my skin crawl. I rounded another corner and found a stairwell leading downward. The smell here was worse, damp, sour, like mold mixed with something sharper, antiseptic and bitter. I hesitated, imagining the basement filled with forgotten relics of the asylum's dark past. But I had to know. I descended slowly, each step echoing hollowly, the beam of my flashlight flickering as if protesting the weight of the secrets below. At the bottom, the air was colder, heavier. The walls were bare concrete, stained in places by old water damage and rust. Ahead, a heavy metal door stood slightly ajar, its hinges squeaking when I nudged it open. Inside was a small room cluttered with rusted medical equipment and broken glass files. What caught my eye immediately was a series of filing cabinets lined against the far wall. I stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind me and plunging the room into near darkness save for my flashlight's glow. I rifled through the drawers, finding patient records, medical charts, and handwritten notes, some legible, others smeared by time and moisture. The names were chilling: patients who had disappeared without explanation, experiments abruptly halted, and references to treatment protocols that sounded more like punishments. One folder bore a label in faded ink, Subject X. Inside was a folder filled with photographs, black and white images of gaunt faces, restrained bodies, and surgical instruments I didn't recognize. The photos were clinical, yet grotesque in their implication. These weren't just reports. They were evidence. Suddenly, a sharp noise from the hallway made me freeze. My heart slammed against my ribs as I held my breath, listening. The sound was faint but distinct, a scrape against concrete, like fingernails or maybe a dragging object. I swallowed hard and edged toward the door, pressing my ear against the cold metal. Nothing but silence. I convinced myself it was just the building settling or a rat scurrying through the shadows, but the unease took root deep inside me. I shoved a filing cabinet drawer shut and slipped out of the room, locking the door behind me as best I could. The stairwell seemed darker on the way back up, the beam of my flashlight barely cutting through the thickening shadows. Back on the main floor, I paused at a junction where two long corridors met. My instinct told me to retrace my steps and leave, but some stubborn part of me pushed onward. I turned left, following the hallway until I found a door marked maintenance. Inside, the air was stale, and the floor was littered with debris. But then, a glint caught my eye under a pile of dust-covered rags, a small, leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn. I opened it carefully, the pages brittle but intact. The handwriting was neat and precise, a stark contrast to the frantic scrawl in the notebook from before. This journal belonged to a Dr. Harold Klein, one of the asylum's lead physicians during its final years. His entries detailed the gradual decline of the institution, the increasing desperation of the staff, and the experiments conducted in the name of progress. He spoke of patients who were lost to the system, records erased or hidden away, and a pervasive paranoia that something or someone was undermining their work from within. One entry stood out. The shadows grow longer. There is a presence here, watching. Not one of us, but something else. We speak in whispers, afraid to draw attention. I fear the asylum itself has become a prison in more ways than one. A chill ran down my spine. The phrase echoed the message from the notebook, confirming that someone else had known about this unseen watcher. But who or what was it? And was it still here? I snapped the journal shut and stuffed it into my backpack. I needed to find a safer place to think, somewhere with better light and less risk. But as I turned toward the exit, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye as shadow slipping just beyond the edge of the flashlight's beam. I swung the light toward it, heart pounding, but the hallway was empty. Still, the feeling of being watched intensified. I quickened my pace, the echo of my footsteps now joined by another sound, soft, deliberate, and following me. I reached the main entrance, but the heavy glass doors were locked tight, sealed by rusted bolts I couldn't undo. Panic fluttered in my chest. I wasn't prepared to spend the night here with whatever or whoever was lurking in the darkness. Ahead, a faint light flickered from a window down the hall, a pale glow that didn't belong to my flashlight. Someone else was in the building, and they weren't just watching. They were waiting. I swallowed my fear and headed toward the light, each step heavier than the last. Whatever secrets this place held, I was no longer alone in uncovering them. And that realization was far more terrifying than any ghost story could ever be. The flickering light came from a door slightly ajar at the end of the hall, its pale glow pulsing like a weak heartbeat. I hesitated, fingers brushing the rusted handle. The metal was cold, and the faint hum of electricity buzzed faintly behind the door. Whoever was inside wasn't just squatting in an empty wing, they had power here. That realization sent a fresh wave of dread through me. I thought back to the journal's cryptic warnings. There is a presence here, watching. Now I was no longer just being watched. I was about to confront it. Gathering what little courage I had left, I pushed the door open. The room inside was smaller than I'd expected, more clinical than the peeling corridors outside. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows across a tangle of medical equipment and rusted gurneys. I spotted glass jars lining a shelf, some still containing preserved specimens, distorted limbs, twisted faces frozen in formaldehyde. The air smelled of chemicals and decay. My flashlight beam swept the room, catching a figure crouched near a metal cabinet. The person froze, then slowly turned toward me. "Who's there?" I whispered, the words barely audible. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they slipped away into a narrow passage concealed behind a false wall panel I hadn't noticed before. My heart hammered as I stepped forward, the journal heavy in my pack, the weight of every unanswered question pressing down on me. I moved toward the secret passage, my flashlight bobbing with every step. The narrow corridor smelled of damp earth and rust, and the walls were slick with moisture. I had no idea where it led, but the presence I'd sensed was real, and now it was close, too close. At the end of the passage, I found another door, this one reinforced with heavy steel. A small window embedded in it revealed a dimly lit room beyond, filled with rows of filing cabinets and old medical charts scattered across a long table. The walls were lined with photographs, patient portraits, many of them with their faces scratched out or obscured. Some images were pinned alongside handwritten notes, detailing symptoms, treatments, and most disturbingly, experiments. I pressed my eye to the window, scanning the room. Then I saw it, movement. A shadow shifted near the far end, a figure hunched over a desk cluttered with papers. They looked up suddenly, catching my gaze through the glass. Our eyes met for a brief, frozen moment before they disappeared from view. I stepped back, heart racing. This wasn't just an abandoned asylum. Someone had been living here, hiding these records, preserving the secrets. And they were watching me. I circled the door, searching for a way in. The steel was thick, but the lock looked old, brittle. I found a loose screw in the frame and managed to pry the door open just enough to slip inside. The room was a hidden archive, a mausoleum of forgotten lives. Patient files detailed horrific procedures, lobotomies performed without anesthesia, electrical shocks administered as punishment, experimental drugs tested on unwilling subjects. The weight of the decades-old abuses pressed down on me like a physical force. I sifted through the papers, finding a file on a patient named Eleanor Voss. She'd been admitted in the asylum's final years, listed as lost to the system. Her records were incomplete, but there was a note scrawled in the margin: subject exhibits unexpected resilience. Protocol altered. Observation intensified. Beneath it, a series of photos showed her hooked up to strange machines, her eyes wide with terror. A sudden noise startled me, a faint scraping sound from the far corner. I froze, listening. The figure from before was back, standing silently in the shadows. "You shouldn't be here," a voice said, low and steady. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice calm. "Who are you?" They stepped forward, revealing a gaunt face framed by tangled hair. "I'm the one who's been watching. Keeping this place alive." "Why?" I asked, heart pounding. "Because if these secrets get out, everything falls apart. The truth is worse than you can imagine." I tightened my grip on the journal. "I'm not leaving until I understand." They smiled, thin and brittle. "Then you've crossed a point of no return." Behind them, the lights flickered again, and the room seemed to pulse with a cold, oppressive energy. I realized then that this wasn't just a forgotten asylum. It was a trap, and I was right in the middle of it. A sudden draft swept through the room, carrying whispers that seemed to coil around my thoughts. The journal's pages fluttered as if alive, settling on a passage I hadn't seen before, words scrawled in a shaky hand, warning of something buried beneath the asylum's foundation. I glanced back at my companion, but their eyes were clouded, distant, as if the weight of history had hollowed them out. What lies beneath? I pressed, the chill creeping up my spine. They hesitated, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "A darkness that feeds on fear, on pain. It's why this place was abandoned, why no one ever returned sane." The flickering lights plunged the room into momentary shadow, and a low hum began to resonate from below, growing louder, echoing through the floorboards. I took a hesitant step forward, heart hammering, realizing that understanding the asylum's secrets meant confronting the horror that lurked just beneath us. The hum beneath the floorboards didn't fade with morning light. I found the gaunt figure waiting in the main corridor, leaning against the peeling wallpaper like a shadow reluctant to move. The morning light spilled weakly through grime-coated windows, casting long, slanting beams across the cracked linoleum. "We don't have much time," they said, voice rough. "If you want answers, you need to see what's beneath." I nodded, heart thudding. The journal's warnings echoed in my mind. Something terrible was hidden below, feeding on fear and pain. Fear was easy enough to come by down here. Pain, too. We moved carefully toward the back of the asylum, the part one hadn't dared explore the night before. The walls narrowed, the air grew colder, and the faint hum grew louder, vibrating underfoot. The gaunt figure led me to a rusted metal door, half hidden beneath a collapsed section of plaster. They produced a key from a threadbare coat pocket, its metal dull and worn. "This door hasn't been opened in decades," they murmured, the lock clicking open with a reluctant groan. The basement beyond was a narrow stone stairwell, descending in near darkness. The smell hit me immediately, damp earth, mold, and something sharper underneath, like antiseptic and rust. My fingers brushed the cold, rough wall as we went deeper, the hum now a tangible vibration in my bones. At the bottom, we stepped into a long corridor lined with doors, each marked with faded numbers and cryptic symbols. I recognized some of the numbers from the journal's records, rooms where patients had been held, experimented on, forgotten. The gaunt figure paused before one door, their hand trembling as they pushed it open. Inside was a room frozen in time, a rusted gurney, stained sheets, an array of medical instruments arranged neatly on a metal tray. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant, mingled with decay. "This is where it started," they said quietly. "Where they tried to erase the past." I moved closer, eyes scanning the instruments, needles, scalpels, strange contraptions I couldn't name. My gaze caught on a thick folder resting on a battered desk. I flipped it open and found detailed records of experiments, electroconvulsive therapies pushed beyond humane limits, injections of untested chemicals, sensory deprivation chambers. Each entry was clinical and cold, but the notes scribbled in margins were anything but words like screams, breakdown, irreparable damage. I swallowed hard. Who did this? They looked away. Doctors. Scientists. Men who believed the ends justified the means. They called it progress. I called it hell. A sudden noise made us both freeze, a faint, scraping sound from deeper in the corridor. The gaunt figure's eyes narrowed, and they pulled a small flashlight from their coat. "Stay close," they whispered. We moved down the hall, the beam cutting through layers of dust and shadow. The scraping came again, more insistent, metal against metal, but it wasn't random. It was deliberate, measured. Then, around a corner, I saw it, a figure crouched by a heavy steel door, its edges corroded and warped. The figure was naked but gaunt, skin pale and stretched tight over ribs like a skeleton's, eyes wild and unblinking in the flashlight's beam. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice steadier than I felt. The gaunt figure stepped forward sharply. "Get away from there." The crouched figure looked up slowly, lips peeling back in a grim, toothless smile. "You shouldn't be here," it rasped, voice cracked and dry. "They left me here, forgot me." My companion moved between us, but the figure suddenly lunged at the door, slamming their fists against it with a rage that echoed out the stone walls. "They kept me down here," it whispered fiercely. "I wasn't supposed to live. But I did. And now I see you." The gaunt figure's hand went to their pocket, fingers tightening around something small and cold. "We don't want to hurt you," they said quietly. "But if you come any closer..." The figure's wild eyes flicked between us, madness and desperation swirling in their gaze. Then, abruptly, they turned and vanished into a side passage, the scraping sound retreating, swallowed by shadows. I exhaled shakily, heart hammering. What was that? "They were a patient," the gaunt figure said, voice low and tight. "Left behind when the asylum closed. Forgotten in the darkness. They've been living down here, watching, waiting." A cold dread settled over me. This wasn't just about old records and forgotten rooms anymore. This was about a living nightmare, trapped beneath the asylum's bones, and now aware of my intrusion. "We have to keep moving," the gaunt figure urged. "There's more down here, things you need to see before it's too late." I hesitated, torn between the instinct to run and the need to understand. The journal was still clutched in my hand, its pages fluttering like a warning. Whatever lay beneath this asylum, it was far worse than I'd imagined. We pressed deeper into the labyrinth, the walls closing in, the growing louder, the shadows thicker. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond the flashlight's reach, eyes were watching, waiting to strike. I couldn't tell if it was the patient or the gaunt figure who posed a greater threat. But I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to leave this place without the truth, no matter the cost. And the truth was still buried beneath the asylum's shattered foundation, deeper than I dared to go. The air beneath the asylum had never felt heavier. We moved cautiously, the gaunt figure leading the way, their flashlight beam slicing through the oppressive darkness. I wanted to ask their name, to tether this living ghost to something human, but my voice stuck somewhere between fear and disbelief. Instead, I clutched the tattered journal tighter, its brittle pages a fragile thread to the past we were unraveling. The deeper we went, the more obvious it became that this wasn't just a forgotten asylum. It was a graveyard of human dignity, a nightmare frozen in time. We passed rows of rusted beds, some still stained with what looked like dried blood or something darker, more permanent. The walls were lined with peeling paint and scrawled patient names, scratched in desperation or madness. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every lost soul who had ever been trapped here. Then we found it, the hidden wing, sealed off behind a heavy metal door that groaned as the gaunt figure pushed it open. Inside, the stench hit me first, a sickly mix of chemicals, decay, and something metallic. The room was a grotesque museum of medical horror, cages and restraints, jars filled with murky fluids and unidentifiable organs, charts and notes that chronicled experiments too cruel to imagine. The gaunt figure's eyes glistened with something unreadable: pain? Resentment? Sorrow? They wanted to erase them, the figure whispered. Patients who didn't fit their narrative. Those experiments weren't just treatment. They were punishment, control. And when the asylum closed, they left these horrors behind. Left me behind. I nodded, swallowing my revulsion. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I had come this far. I had to see it all. There was a sudden noise, a rattling, a scraping from the shadows beyond the room. My heart leapt. The gaunt figure stiffened, eyes narrowing. "They're here," they said, voice low and urgent. "More than one. I'm not alone down here." Panic surged, but beneath it, a steel resolve. If this place had claimed so many lives, if it still imprisoned those broken by cruelty and neglect, then I had a duty to expose it, to give them a voice, to end the silence. We moved quickly, the gaunt figure guiding me through winding corridors that twisted like veins through the building's rotten core. I caught glimpses of other figures, thin, pale, some limping, others barely able to stand, watching us from the darkness. Not all were hostile, some looked terrified, others wary. It was a community born of abandonment, their humanity chipped away by years underground. When we reached a narrow stairwell leading upward, the gaunt figure hesitated. "I can't leave," they said quietly. "This is my home now. But you have to get out. Tell them." I hesitated. "I don't want to leave you here." They shook their head, a sad smile touching their lips. "I'm already gone." "But you're not. You can be their voice." It wasn't a choice. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I will." The climb was brutal. The stairwell was crumbling, the air thick with dust and the scent of rot. When we finally emerged into the dim morning light filtering through broken windows, the asylum's desolate exterior felt almost surreal after the nightmare beneath. Outside, I found a payphone, one of the few relics still working, and called the local authorities. My voice was steady despite the tremor inside. I told them everything: the hidden rooms, the experiments, the forgotten patients living in the shadows. I begged for a proper investigation, for help. Days passed. The police came, then a small team of journalists and social workers. The gaunt figure watched from a distance, their expression unreadable as the world they'd been trapped in began to unravel. They refused to leave, choosing instead to stay part sentinel, part prisoner in the ruins they called home. For me, the experience left scars deeper than any physical wound. I returned to my life, but everything felt altered, as if a veil had been lifted to reveal the darkness lurking beneath the surface of ordinary reality. The asylum's horrors had forced me to confront my own fears of abandonment, of helplessness, of the cruelty humans are capable of when cloaked in authority. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into writing, documenting everything with care and respect. The gaunt figure's story, the patient's lost voices, the cold indifference that let it all happen. It was the least I could do. The journal I'd found was published alongside my account, a testament to those who had vanished into darkness. One evening, as I sat by my desk, a letter arrived, a scrawled note on yellow paper. It was from the gaunt figure. Thank you for seeing me, for not turning away. I am still here, but now alone. There is hope, because you carried it back with you. I folded the note carefully, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and peace. The asylum had changed me, shattered and reshaped me in ways I hadn't understood before. But it had also shown me the power of bearing witness, of refusing to forget. In the end, the real horror wasn't the darkness beneath the asylum, it was the blindness of those who let it fester, the silence that protected cruelty. And by breaking that silence, I had found a way forward, even if the scars remained. Sometimes, late at night, I still see those hollow eyes in my mind's corner, feel their desperate longing to be remembered. And I know, as long as I live, I won't let them fade away. Story 3, Highway Hall Horror, Passenger from the Dead Zone. The highway stretched out like a ribbon of gray through the fading light, the sun setting behind low hills that rolled away into nothing but scrub and dry grass. My rig was a tired old Kenworth, but it ran smooth and steady. I'd taken care of the engine like it was my own kid, and it had paid me back with years of trouble-free hauling. The trailer was loaded tight with industrial equipment bound for a plant that was closing down for maintenance next week. Nothing fancy, nothing urgent, just another routine job. I liked the predictability. It kept my mind clear when the road got long and the hours stretched thin. I glanced in the side mirror, catching the last streaks of daylight. The sky had that bruised purple hue that always made me feel a little uneasy. Not because of the weather, there was no storm coming, but because the emptiness out here had a way of settling into your bones. I'd been alone on countless drives, but this stretch of highway had a reputation among the other drivers I ran with. Some called it the dead zone, not because of accidents or anything literal, but because of how silent it was. No towns, no gas stations, just miles of nothing until you hit the next exit. Cell service was spotty at best, and sometimes you could drive for a half hour without seeing another soul. It was the kind of place that made you feel watched, even when you were the only one around. I kept my eyes peeled, though nothing out of the ordinary caught my attention. The road ahead was empty, the yellow lines glowing faintly under the headlights. Just past mile marker 78, I noticed something at the shoulder, a figure standing by the guardrail. I slowed down a bit, curiosity getting the better of me. It was a man, maybe in his early 30s, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. He looked tired, maybe even desperate. I hesitated. Picking up hitchhikers was against company policy, and I heard plenty of stories about drivers getting robbed or worse. But something about the way he stood there, shoulders hunched and head down, made me pause. The sun was dipping fast, and I figured I could at least offer a ride to the next exit. Worst case, I'd drop him off at a gas station and keep moving. I pulled over, the gravel crunching under my wheels. The man looked up as I killed the engine, his eyes dark and sharp in the dim light. He didn't say a word at first, just nodded and climbed into the passenger seat without asking. I noticed his hands were rough and dirty, like he'd been working hard or on the run for some time. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to keep the mood light. He shrugged. "Anywhere but here." That was all the answer I got. He seemed restless, glancing out the window every few seconds like he expected someone to be chasing him. The silence between us stretched, growing heavier with each mile I put behind us. The radio was off now, the static was too distracting, and the only sound was the steady hum of the diesel engine and the tires on asphalt. I wanted to ask more, to find out why he was out here alone at night, but something in his eyes told me to hold back. It wasn't the kind of expression you saw in a man looking for help. It was something colder, like a warning. The road curved gently to the left, and I spotted the flicker of headlights far behind us. At first, I thought it was a car catching up, maybe someone looking for him. The man tensed beside me, his fingers tightening on the edge of the seat. I checked the mirror again. The headlights were moving fast, closing in quicker than they should. "Should I pull over?" I asked, my voice low. He shook his head, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Keep going. Don't stop." My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't just some lost traveler anymore. Whatever he was running from, it was serious, and now I was caught in the middle of it. I glanced down at the dashboard. No signal. Of course. No chance of calling for help out here, where the only signs of civilization were the occasional faded road markers disappearing behind us. The rate picked up speed, the tires humming louder against the pavement. The headlights behind us blinked once and then vanished into the darkness. I exhaled slowly, relief washing over me, but the man's gaze didn't soften. He leaned back, his face illuminated by the dashboard light for a brief moment. There was a flash of something, anger, fear, or maybe something darker, and just like that, the uneasy silence returned, thicker than before. There was no turning back now. The highway stretched ahead, an endless ribbon of shadow and light, and every mile felt heavier than the last. I stole a glance at him, trying to decipher the storm still brewing behind his eyes, but he remained unreadable, lips pressed into a thin line. Outside, the world blurred past trees, signs, the occasional glimmer of a distant town, none offering comfort or promise. The radio crackled softly, a half-forgotten song playing somewhere beneath the tension. I reached out, hesitating before placing a hand on his arm. His eyes locked on mine, searching, maybe hoping. Whatever this night held, we were caught in it together, and the road ahead wasn't just about distance, it was about facing the shadows within us both. The night deepened, and the road stretched on without mercy. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 2:14 a.m., and thought about how long we'd been driving. The last town had been hours back, a smudge of neon in shuttered storefronts swallowed by the dark. Ahead, nothing but the faint outlines of trees and the endless black ribbon of asphalt. No sign of life. No cell service. Nothing but the hum of the engine and the scrape of tires on pavement. My fingers drummed on the wheel, restless and uncertain. I wanted to ask him more about where he was headed, about what he was running from, but every question seemed to settle like a stone in my throat. Instead, I watched him closely, trying to catch a flicker of truth behind his guarded eyes. Then, without warning, he spoke. "Do you know the worst part about being out here?" His voice was low, edged with something sharp. "It's that nobody hears you scream." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep my hands steady on the wheel. "Why did you run?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared out the windshield, the dim light catching the sharp angles of his face. "Finally," he said, "because they were coming to get me. And if they caught me, it'd be the end." The words chilled me, but I pressed on. "Who?" "The police." He laughed then, but it was a dry, humorless sound. "No, not the cops. Something worse." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, unfolding it carefully. "I had to get away from them before they found me." I took the paper from his hand, curious despite myself. It was a handwritten note, jagged and hurried, the ink smudged in places. The words were barely legible, but I made out fragments, threats, warnings, a name crossed out and replaced with another. A phone number, scratched out in a way that suggested desperation. "Who wrote this?" I asked. He hesitated. "Someone I used to trust. Someone who turned on me." His eyes flicked back to mine, dark and haunted. "They want me dead." The rig rumbled beneath us as I absorbed his words. Everything about this trip was unraveling, and I was caught in the middle of a story I didn't want to be part of. But there was no turning back. Not now. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. Nothing. The headlights from before hadn't returned. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a shadow at the edge of my vision. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck, the kind of unease that makes your skin crawl. "Do you think they'll find us?" I asked quietly. He shrugged, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "If they do, I'm ready." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe there was some way out of this nightmare. But deep down, I knew we were racing towards something dark, something inevitable. Suddenly, the radio crackled, a burst of static cutting through the silence. Then a voice, faint and urgent, came through, so faint I almost missed it. "Escapee, last seen. Highway 52, dangerous, do not approach, call authorities." The man's head snapped toward the speaker, eyes wide with alarm. "They're talking about me," he said, voice tight. "They know where I am." My heart hammered. The isolation I hoped would keep us safe was now a trap. Out here, miles from help, with no cell signal, nowhere to run. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "Because I thought I could handle it," he said, voice breaking. "But now it's worse. They're closer." The rig's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the empty road ahead. The weight of the silence pressed down harder than before. I realized then that this wasn't just a drive, it was a countdown. And somewhere behind us, in the dark, the hunt was closing in. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to focus. "Okay," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "We need a plan. We can't just keep driving blindly." He nodded, eyes flicking nervously to the rearview mirror. "There's a rest stop a few miles ahead. We could try to lose them there, maybe double back." I bit my lip. It was risky. The rest stop would be exposed. But right now, exposure was better than blind flight. I glanced out the window, the dense forest creeping close on either side of the highway, shadows pooling like liquid ink. "All right," I agreed. We stop. We wait for a gap, then we double back through the trees. Maybe find some cover, hide the rig. His relief was almost palpable. "You really think that'll work?" "It's better than driving straight into their arms," I said. "We need to be smarter. Quieter." The rig's engine hummed steadily as we pulled up the highway, the gravel crunching beneath heavy tires. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat echoing the tread that pressed against my ribs. The rest stop was deserted, no flickering neon, no stray cars. Just a lone, flickering street lamp struggling against the night. The perfect place to vanish or to be found. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Neither of us moved for a long moment, listening. Then a distant rumble, low and growing. Headlights bobbed into view down the highway, unmistakably large, too steady to be coincidence. "They're here," he whispered. I grabbed the flashlight from the dashboard, clicking it on. The narrow beam cut a line through the darkness, piercing the forest's edge. Somewhere beyond, the underbrush shifted. "We don't have much time," I said, voice low. We split up. "I'll draw them away, you hide the rig. Meet back here in 10. "No," he said firmly. "We stick together." I shook my head. "If we get caught together, it's over. Trust me." He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. I slipped out into the cold night, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Branches scraped my jacket as I plunged into the woods, the sound of the rig's engine fading behind me. The hunted had become the hunter. And now, there was no turning back. The woods closed behind me like a shutter snapping shut. I wasn't sure how far I'd gone before the rig's engine was nothing more than a memory swallowed by the night. Somewhere behind me, the hitchhiker was supposed to be hiding the truck, but that thought only made me more uneasy. He'd been calm, almost cooperative, but there was something beneath the surface, not just desperation, but something darker. Something I hadn't fully grasped until now. I crouched behind a fallen log, chest heaving, ears straining. The headlights receded along the highway, their bright glow swallowed by the trees. For a moment, I dared to hope we'd shaken them. But hope was a fragile thing, and I wasn't about to let it lure me into a trap. The forest was unnervingly still. No coyotes howling, no rustling critters, just an oppressive silence that pressed against my skin. I reached into my pocket and found the small, crumpled map I'd stuffed in there earlier. I'd been so focused on the immediate threat I hadn't really looked at it until now. There was a narrow service road running parallel to the highway, barely marked, and it seemed to loop back toward a cluster of buildings a few miles back. A fuel station, maybe a maintenance yard. Somewhere to hide, or at least to find help. That's when I heard it, the faint click of a lighter, followed by a soft curse. My heart slammed against my ribs. I spun toward the sound, flashlight cutting through the underbrush. There he was. The hitchhiker, sitting on a moss-covered rock, the orange glow of a cigarette tip pulsing in the darkness. His eyes caught the light, sharp and wild. "You didn't think I'd just hide the rig and wait, did you?" he said, voice low but steady. "I'm not playing a game here." I swallowed hard. "You could have left. You didn't have to come with me." He laughed, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Leaving means getting caught. You think those guys out there are going to let me walk away? I'm not looking for a ride to the next town. I'm looking for freedom." I studied him. The lines around his mouth, the tension in his hands, the way his eyes darted nervously toward the highway. He was dangerous, that much was clear. But so was I, in my own way. In this situation, neither of us had the luxury of weakness. "We can get through this," I said carefully. "But only if you trust me. We need a plan." He flicked the cigarette aside, crushing it under his boot. "Plans get people killed. I'm done running in circles." Then, unexpectedly, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. My eyes narrowed as he unfolded it, revealing a grainy photocopy of a wanted poster, his face staring back at me, marked with bold letters, "Escape, convict, violent." "I stole this from the sheriff's office," he said quietly. "Figured it might come in handy. See, I'm not just some desperate guy hitching a ride, I'm a ghost. They want me dead or alive. The weight of the revelation slammed into me. This wasn't just a runaway. This was a man who'd crossed every line, a man whose freedom meant blood on someone else's hands. And now, I was trapped in this nightmare with him. We're not far from that service road, I said, squinting at the map. If we can get there, maybe we can find a way off this stretch. Maybe even call for help. He looked at the paper in his hand, then back at me. Help? From who? You think those bastards out there will just let us call for help? They're not cops. They're hunters. A shiver ran down my spine. Hunters. Not lawmen. Men who wanted him gone, no questions asked. And now, by extension, me too. We can't stay here, I said firmly. If they catch us, it's over. He stood up, brushing dirt from his jeans. Then we move. But I'm driving. I stared at him, the shock plain on my face. You want to drive? After everything that's happened? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a small, worn knife from his pocket, flipping it open with a practiced flick. The blade caught the moonlight, sharp and unforgiving. If I'm going down, I'm not a passenger, he said. You're not the only one who can take control. I swallowed the lump in my throat. This wasn't just a man with nothing to lose. This was a man who was ready to fight his way out or die trying. I looked back toward the highway, where the distant rumble had returned, closer now. The hunters were circling in, tightening the noose. We don't have a choice, I said, voice steady despite the fear. We move now. He nodded, slipping the knife back into his pocket. Good. Because I have a plan. But it's going to get messy. We moved through the trees, every step calculated, every shadow a potential threat. The rig was still parked where we'd left it, its dark bulk looming against the night. I climbed into the cab, heart pounding as he took the driver's seat. I watched his hands grip the wheel, knuckles white, the knife now out of sight but lingering in my mind like a warning. Where to? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He glanced at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Anywhere but here. We're going north, off the main roads. I know a place. A safe spot. But it's not on any map. I swallowed hard, the weight of the unknown settling over me. This was the point of no return. Whatever lay ahead, there was no turning back to the life I'd known. The rig rumbled to life, tires crunching on the gravel as we pulled back onto the highway. The headlights behind us flared, growing brighter, closer. I clenched my fists, eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. Freedom was a dangerous game, and the hunters were closing in fast. The highway stretched ahead like a ribbon of black glass, broken only by the occasional flicker of distant headlights or the pale glow of a roadside marker. He kept his hands tight on the wheel, the knife tucked away but never far from his thoughts. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted between the road and the mirror, calculating, always calculating. There was no room for mistakes, not now. North, he said finally, voice low, almost a growl. I'm taking us off the main roads. They'll expect us to stick to the highway, but I know back routes. Old logging roads, service tracks, places no one bothers with anymore. I swallowed. How far? My throat was dry, words catching before they came out. Far enough. A couple of hours at least. We'll have to slow down, though. These roads aren't made for a rig this size. The idea of crawling down narrow, winding dirt paths in this giant truck made my stomach turn. But there wasn't a better option. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, The only thing worse than being caught was running out of road. The rig's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the faded signs and cracked asphalt as we exited the highway onto a narrower, almost forgotten road. The trees leaned in close on either side, their branches clawing at the cab as we passed. The headlights behind us hesitated, then slowed too, as if deciding whether to follow. We both held our breath. Minutes passed like hours. The rig bounced over potholes and gravel, the suspension groaning under the strain. I kept glancing at him, trying to read the lines on his face, the set of his shoulders. Behind the mask of controlled fury, I wondered what he was really thinking. Was he scared? Angry? Or just waiting for the moment to strike? Why me? I blurted suddenly, unable to hold it in any longer. Why take me along in this nightmare? He didn't answer right away. The rig hit a patch of loose gravel, skidding slightly, and he corrected with a sharp twist of the wheel. Then, finally, his voice came, rough and quiet. Because I need someone. Someone who can keep their head. Someone who can help if things go sideways. I blinked, surprised. You think I'm that person? He glanced over, a flicker of something like grudging respect in his eyes. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just desperate. The silence settled again, heavier this time. The road narrowed further, the trees pressing in so close I half expected them to reach through the windows. My heart hammered in my chest, every nerve screaming that we were walking or driving into a trap. But there was no turning back. Suddenly, the rig jolted hard, the cab lurching as the tires caught on something. He swore under his breath, fighting to keep control as the truck skidded sideways, scraping against the gravel shoulder. Hold on, he snapped, voice sharp as a blade. I braced myself, hands gripping the edge of the seat as the rig corrected and righted itself. The headlights behind us flared in the mirror, closer than ever. Damn it, he muttered. They're not giving up. I looked at him, really looked, for the first time since we'd started this nightmare. He wasn't some anonymous threat anymore. He was a man caught in the same desperate fight as me, maybe even more so. But the knife in his pocket was a constant reminder that his desperation could turn deadly in an instant. We need a plan, I said. We can't just keep running blindly. He nodded, eyes narrowing. I know a place up ahead. An old barn, about a mile off this road. It's isolated, hidden. We can hole up there, regroup. Can we trust it? He shrugged. It's better than nothing. The rig rumbled forward, every vibration underlining the urgency. The headlights behind us flickered again, then suddenly, without warning, the rig's radio crackled to life, static, then a voice, sharp and commanding. Pull over. This is law enforcement. You are surrounded. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't coming from somewhere far off. It was inside the cab, in the speaker, as if they were right behind us. He cursed, slamming his fist on the dashboard. They found us. The rig's lights swept the dark road, searching. Can you jam the signal? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. He shook his head. No time. They're too close. The rig's speed increased, tires biting into the gravel as he pushed forward, the barn's outline appearing faint in the distance. The headlights behind us multiplied, another vehicle joining the chase. Brace yourself, he said, voice tight. This is going to get rough. I swallowed hard, hands gripping the seatbelt as the rig veered sharply off the road, engines roaring against the night. The chase wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Dust kicked up in thick plumes, swirling around us as the rig lurched over uneven terrain. Shadows danced in the headlights' glare, and every jolt sent a sharp ache through my ribs. Behind, The pursuers kept pace, their engines relentless. Suddenly, the rig skidded sideways on loose gravel, sparks flying as metal scraped against rock. He cursed under his breath, fighting for control. "Hold on tight," he warned again, eyes fixed ahead. The night stretched on, unforgiving and endless. The dawn was a pale promise bleeding through the cracked windshield when the rig finally slowed. He killed the engine, and the sudden quiet was almost suffocating. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The rig's cab felt smaller now, the cramped space a cage that neither of us wanted but neither dared leave. I glanced sideways at him, his face was drawn tight, shadows under his eyes deepening the lines that had appeared in the past few hours. The knife was gone from his pocket, but the tension in his hands didn't ease. "We should check the barn," he said quietly, voice low. "See if there's anything useful." I nodded, running a hand through my hair, still slick with sweat from the night's panic and adrenaline. "Right. But we need a plan after that. We can't just sit here." He gave a bitter laugh, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Plan?" The plan was to get away. Now we're stuck. The barn creaked ominously as we pushed the rig's doors open. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of old hay, stale and musty. I shivered, not from cold but from the sudden wave of reality crashing down. We weren't just running anymore. We were trapped, hiding like criminals in a shell of forgotten wood. He moved with a cautious purpose, flashlight in hand, scanning the shadows. I followed close, my own breath loud in the silence. There wasn't much, a few broken crates, some rusted tools hanging on the walls. I spotted a coil of wire and a battered crowbar, nothing that felt like a weapon but better than nothing. "We can use these," I said, picking up the crowbar. "Maybe block the door if they try to get in." He nodded, eyes flicking toward the only window, its glass cracked but intact. "They'll come back. They have to. We can't wait here all day." I swallowed, the dread settling in my stomach. He was right. Whatever they were, police, bounty hunters, or worse, they wouldn't give up so easily. And we were sitting ducks. We settled into an uneasy watch, the barn's silence broken only by the occasional creak of old wood and the distant call of a crow. I tried to steady my breathing, to think clearly. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about understanding who I had become in the past hours, and how far I was willing to go. He caught me staring at the crowbar, his voice softer this time. "You're scared." "Yeah," I admitted. "But I'm not helpless." He looked at me then, really looked, like he was seeing me for the first time. "You've changed a lot since all this started." I didn't argue. I felt it myself, something hardening inside me, a shift from fear to resolve. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, warming the barn's dusty floor. We shared what little food and water we had. I watched him carefully, the violent edge I'd seen in him before now tempered by exhaustion and something like regret. Then, just as the morning light spilled fully across the horizon, the sound came, the distant wail of sirens. Not one, but several, echoing off the empty landscape and growing louder. He swore under his breath. They found us. I gripped the crowbar tighter. We can't just wait for them to come in. He nodded, eyes sharp again. I have an idea. But you have to trust me. I hesitated. Trust was a fragile thing now, easily broken. But I nodded. Together, we moved quickly, dragging a heavy crate toward the barn door, propping it against the frame. Then he crouched by the window, removing a loose plank just wide enough to slip through. "Go," he said. I slipped out, heart pounding as I sprinted toward the tree line a few yards away. The sirens were deafening now, the flashing lights visible through the gaps in the barn's walls. I crouched behind a thick oak, watching as they surrounded the old building. Officers moved cautiously, weapons drawn, shouting commands. I saw him too, my unexpected companion, emerge from the barn's shadow, hands raised but eyes defiant. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then the shouting grew louder, officers closing in. He didn't resist. I stayed hidden, breath held, until they cuffed him and led him away. When the last patrol car disappeared down the road, I stepped out from behind the tree, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. The ride back to the nearest town was quiet, the officers asking questions I answered in fragments. I was shaken, exhausted, but alive. And as the highway stretched out before me, not empty anymore but crowded with the ordinary hum of daily life, I realized something had shifted inside me. I wasn't just a passenger in someone else's nightmare anymore. I was someone who had faced darkness and survived. Not unscathed, but stronger. Later, alone in a small motel room, I stared out the window at the highway winding into the distance. The road had taught me things about fear, trust, and the fragile line between desperation and violence. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: I was no longer running. I was ready to face whatever came next. The night deepened, and with it, a quiet resolve settled over me. Whatever shadows awaited, they would find me standing firm. This chapter of my life had closed, but the story was far from over. Outside, the distant hum of tires faded into silence. My breath steadied, matching the rhythm of a heart recalibrated for battle and peace alike. Somewhere beyond the dark, a new path awaited, one I would carve with steady hands and clear eyes. The past had shaped me, but it would no longer chain me. Tomorrow, I would step into the unknown, not as a fugitive, but as someone who had finally found where she belonged. Story 4: Vanishing Trails, When the Forest Shifts. I had always thought of myself as someone who understood the wilderness. The first 2 days passed without incident. I started early each morning, my pack loaded light but enough for comfort: water filter, freeze-dried meals, a sturdy jacket. The map I carried was a recent printout from the Forest Service website, topographical, detailed, and reliable, or so I thought. The trail markers were clear, the paths well-trodden, and I kept to my planned route with ease. I liked the solitude, the way the sun filtered through the evergreens, and the occasional chatter of birds. It was the kind of quiet that, after a while, felt like it belonged to you. On the second afternoon, I stopped for a break near a small clearing beside a creek. I pulled out my map and compass, double-checking my position against the landmarks around me. I was right on course. The sun was still high, and the temperature was mild. I felt a rare sense of peace sitting there, the damp earth cool beneath me, the scent of pine thick in the air. I thought about calling it a day, but the trail ahead looked promising enough to push on. That evening, as the light waned, I reached a fork in the trail that wasn't marked on my map. The path split sharply, one veering downhill toward a marshy area, the other climbing steeply into denser woods. I paused, pulling out the map to confirm my bearings. There was no fork indicated at this spot. The map showed a single trail hugging the ridge, with a small stream crossing ahead. I scanned the area carefully, trying to find any sign of a trail marker or a blazed tree, but there was nothing. I chose the uphill path, reasoning that the ridge would offer a better vantage point and hopefully lead me back toward the marked trail. The forest grew darker and thicker as I climbed, the trees crowding in, branches scraping at my jacket. I kept my compass out, but it wobbled slightly, as if caught in a magnetic field. I dismissed it as a quirk, probably interference from the iron-rich rocks I'd noticed earlier. By the time I reached a rocky outcrop, the sun was dipping below the horizon. I stopped to set up camp, feeling a twinge of unease but chalking it up to tiredness. The night sounds were different here, less bird calls, more rustling and distant snapping of twigs. I told myself it was just animals settling in for the night. That night, I barely slept. Every so often, I thought I heard voices, low, muffled, too faint to make out words. I convinced myself it was the wind playing tricks or maybe another hiker 10 miles away. I kept my knife close, my flashlight charged, and my pack ready in case I needed to move quickly. The following morning, things took a more unsettling turn. I followed the ridge as planned, but the landmarks I expected to see were missing. A large pine that should have stood at the trail's edge was gone, replaced by a freshly cut stump. A massive boulder I used as a waypoint on my map was nowhere to be found, only a patch of disturbed earth where it might have lain. The trail itself seemed narrower, overgrown, and in places almost erased. I stopped again, pulling out my compass and map, trying to make sense of it all. The compass needle spun erratically, refusing to settle on north. I tapped it, shook it gently, but nothing changed. It was as if the earth beneath me had shifted, but I knew better. The ground was solid, the trees were real. Something else was at work. That's when I noticed the smell, fresh cut wood, sharp and unmistakable. It wasn't just a fallen pine, it was all around me, like someone had been clearing the forest in secret. My heart quickened. Why would someone cut down trees out here? And more importantly, why erase the trail? I called out once, my voice cracking in the cold air. Hello? Is someone there? Silence answered me. No footsteps, no rustling beyond the natural sounds of the forest. I tried to retrace my steps, but the terrain no longer matched the map in any meaningful way. The trails I'd followed just hours before seemed to have vanished, replaced by new paths that led nowhere or circled back on themselves. The compass refused to point true north, spinning like a toy caught in a child's hand. I sat down heavily on a moss-covered log, trying to calm the rising panic. I told myself it was probably a mistake, a recent logging operation, maybe, or forest management clearing that hadn't been updated on the map. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces didn't fit. No official logging had been scheduled in this part of the forest, and the area was supposed to be protected wilderness. The cleared stumps looked fresh, but not recently marked or signed. It was deliberate, and it was precise. Someone had been here, manipulating the landscape, erasing landmarks, and confusing the maps. And now, it seemed, they were leaving me a maze, trapping me somewhere deep in the woods. I stood up, weighing my options. I could try to push forward, hoping to stumble onto a real trail or a ranger station. Or I could backtrack, though every step seemed to lead me further from the familiar. The compass spun wildly again, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye a faint trail of footprints in the soft earth, partially obscured by pine needles. They were fresh, too fresh for the previous day, and they didn't match my own boots. I swallowed hard, the cold settling into my bones. I wasn't alone out here. And whoever was responsible for this, whoever was changing the forest, had been watching me. I had no idea how long I had been walking blindly, but the realization hit me with full force. I was being hunted, or at the very least, herded. The wilderness I thought I knew was no longer a place of peace, it was a trap. And I was right in the middle of it. I woke before dawn, the cold seeping through the thin fabric of my sleeping bag and the muffled sounds of the forest already stirring outside my tent. I packed up quickly, the chill sharpening my senses. The first light filtered through the dense canopy, casting long shadows that seemed to shift with a life of their own. I tried to orient myself by the sun, but even that felt unreliable. The trees had been felled in strange patterns, and the underbrush looked trampled in places that should have been untouched. It was as if someone had taken a pair of scissors to the forest, clipping away anything that might guide me home. I studied the footprints again, tracing their direction carefully without disturbing the soil. They headed east, skirting what should have been an old creek bed marked on my map, but when I reached that spot, the water was gone, diverted, or dried up. Instead, there was a shallow trench, freshly dug, filled with loose earth and broken branches. The thought hit me sharply. Someone had reshaped the land itself. I followed the footprints cautiously, moving as silently as I could. After an hour, I came upon something that made my stomach tighten, a crude shelter, barely more than a lean-to of branches and tarps, hidden deep in a thicket of brambles. It looked abandoned, but recent. The ground around it was disturbed, scattered with scraps of food wrappers and a half-empty bottle of water. I crouched behind a fallen log, heart pounding. Whoever had built this was close by, maybe watching. The logical part of me screamed to turn back, but curiosity gnawed at the edges of fear. I needed answers. I circled the shelter, noting signs of movement, imprints in the dirt, a cigarette butt crushed underfoot, and a set of footprints larger than my own, with a tread pattern I didn't recognize. They were heavier, deliberate. The person who made them wasn't just passing through. As I studied the area, a distant sound caught my attention, a faint snapping of twigs, rhythmic and deliberate. I froze, listening. It wasn't the random noises of wildlife. It was someone moving with purpose, perhaps trying to avoid detection, but not entirely succeeding. I scanned the underbrush, straining to see beyond the shadows. For a moment, I thought I caught a glimpse of a figure, just beyond the tree line, a flash of dark clothing, a glint of something metallic. Then nothing. I swallowed hard, the knot of dread tightening in my chest. I was not dealing with a casual hiker or even a hunter. This was someone methodical, someone who wanted me lost and possibly afraid. I moved away from the shelter, careful to erase my own tracks as best I could. My mind raced through possibilities. Was this a trap? A game? Or something more sinister? The sun climbed higher, and the forest grew hotter and more oppressive. I decided to keep following the footprints, hoping they would lead somewhere, anywhere, but the trail soon became faint, as if the person I was tracking knew how to cover their tracks better than I did. The trees here were scarred in odd places, bark stripped in long vertical slashes, and several pine stumps had been cut at sharp angles, none matching the typical pattern of logging. It was intentional, a language I couldn't yet read. By midday, hunger gnawed at me, but I pushed on. I found a small clearing with a shallow pool of water, murky but drinkable after filtering. As I knelt to drink, I noticed something etched into the dirt near the water's edge, a series of crude scratches, almost like tally marks, but uneven and hurried. Maybe a message or a warning. I brushed them with my finger, and the sense of being watched intensified. There was no denying it now. I was being hunted, or at least carefully observed. I debated my next move. The logical choice was to head back, find a more familiar landmark, or try to signal for help. But the altered terrain made that impossible, and the compass remained a useless toy in my hand. As I stood and stretched, a sudden, sharp noise cracked through the silence, a branch breaking under heavy weight, very close. I spun around, heart leaping to my throat, but saw only the dense forest. The air was thick with tension, every rustle amplified. Then I heard it again, this time, unmistakable footsteps, quickening, moving toward me. I ducked behind a tree, holding my breath, eyes wide. The footsteps slowed, hesitated, then continued past, deliberately avoiding the clearing. I stayed still for what felt like an eternity, until the footsteps faded into the distance. When I finally dared to move, I realized I'd lost the footprints. The trail had ended abruptly, as if the person simply vanished. As evening approached, I found a small rocky outcrop to set up camp. The sun slipped below the horizon, and the forest darkened into an impenetrable shadow. I sat by my dwindling fire, the weight of the day pressing down. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not just lost, but trapped. And then, just as the last embers glowed, I heard it, a soft, deliberate tapping, coming from somewhere beyond the trees, slow and measured. A code, maybe. A warning. or an invitation. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness. Nothing moved, but the tapping continued, steady and unyielding. I was no longer wandering blindly. Someone wanted me to follow. And I wasn't sure if it was to save me or to lead me deeper into the trap. Morning broke gray and heavy, like the sky was pressing down just to remind me I wasn't safe here. I packed up quickly, the unsettling tapping from the night before still echoing faintly in my mind. I wondered if I should have followed it, but the idea of walking toward whatever was out there, someone waiting, watching, felt like stepping into a snare. Yet staying put wasn't an option either. I had to move, had to try and find some way out. I pulled the map from my pack again, smoothing it against a rock. The trails marked on it no longer matched the landscape. The creek I'd been following disappeared abruptly several hundred yards back. I'd passed what should have been a thick patch of pines, but the ground was bare, shattered stumps poking out like broken teeth. Someone had been through here, and recently. I traced the path I'd taken with my finger, trying to reconcile the map with the real world. But every landmark was wrong, a ridge flattened, a boulder missing, a thicket that had vanished. I felt like I was walking inside a puzzle someone else was rearranging while I wasn't looking. My compass, stubbornly spinning like a mad top, offered no help. I'd never seen one behave like this outside of a science classroom demonstration. It was as if something nearby was interfering with the magnetic field or someone had tampered with it. The thought chilled me more than the damp morning air. I kept moving, heading toward where the map indicated a road should be, hoping for a sign of civilization or at least a clearer path. Hours later, I came across fresh cut logs stacked neatly beside the trail. The wood was cleanly sliced, too precise for anyone doing casual clearing. It smelled faintly of gasoline and oil. Near the pile, I spotted tire tracks deep and recent, the tread pattern unfamiliar. That's when I heard voices, low, rough, just beyond the tree line. I froze, heart pounding, every instinct screaming to run or hide. Instead, I crouched behind a fallen log, straining to listen. "Did you check the north ridge?" "Nothing but dead ends last time," one voice said, clipped and businesslike. "Yeah, but no sign of the kid." "He's gotta be lost somewhere, or he's playing us," the other replied. "Keep an eye out. He can't have gotten far. Let's split up. East and west. We close in, he won't have anywhere to run." I swallowed hard, the realization settling like a stone in my stomach. They weren't just watching me, they were hunting me. And by the sound of it, more than one person. I had thought I was alone in this, but now I knew otherwise. This wasn't random wilderness cruelty, it was deliberate, calculated. I scrambled silently away from the log, trying to put distance between myself and the voices. The terrain was rough, the underbrush scratching at my arms and legs. Every snap of a twig made me flinch. I didn't dare look back. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a shallow depression in the earth where the trees thinned. I paused to catch my breath and noticed something odd, footprints. They were too large for mine and fresh, leading in multiple directions. Someone had been here recently, and they deliberately covered their tracks in parts, making it impossible to tell which path was safe. I pulled out my phone, no signal, of course, but the flashlight function worked. I scanned the ground and noticed something else, tiny bits of glass, like fragments of a broken bottle, scattered in a rough semicircle. It looked like a crude trap, something to slow or injure whoever stepped on it. That's when I heard it again, a faint metallic clang, followed by the unmistakable sound of a bear trap snapping shut somewhere nearby. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Whoever was doing this knew the land intimately. They were setting traps, watching, waiting. I pressed my back against a tree and considered my options. I could try to follow the tracks, hoping they led somewhere safe. Or I could find higher ground and try to get my bearings, despite the useless compass. Neither choice felt right. Then, through the thinning trees, I spotted movement, a figure stepping cautiously along the ridge, a rifle slung over their shoulder. I ducked instinctively, heart hammering. The person stopped, scanning the woods with a sharp gaze. They weren't just any hunter, they moved with purpose, confidence, as if they'd done this before. I caught my breath and then, almost without thinking, called out, "Hey! Wait!" The figure stiffened, hand going to the rifle's grip. I raised my hand slowly, trying to show I meant no harm. "I'm lost, I don't want trouble. Can you help me?" For a long moment, the person didn't move. Then, surprisingly, they lowered the rifle slightly. A woman stepped forward, her face sharp and wary under a worn cap. "You're lucky I'm not the kind to shoot first," she said. Her voice was low, tinged with exhaustion. "What are you doing out here?" I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. "I was hiking. I think someone's been messing with the trails, cutting trees, setting traps. I'm lost." She nodded slowly, then glanced over her shoulder. "You're in deeper trouble than you think. This place, it's a game for some people. They want to keep you here. You need to come with me if you want to get out." Before I could answer, a crackling noise came from the bushes behind her, something breaking through the undergrowth. Both of us turned sharply. A group of figures emerged, faces shadowed, ice cold. The woman's hand went to her rifle again, but the odds looked grim. I realized then that whatever this place was, and whoever was playing this game, I had just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The forest had stopped being a wilderness. It was a trap, and I was right in its center. The morning light filtered through the thick canopy, casting mild shadows across the forest floor, but it did little to warm the chill crawling up my spine. We had moved quietly before dawn, slipping through the underbrush to avoid the main trails. Mara's knowledge of the forest was undeniable. She navigated with a confidence I envied, even as my own compass spun aimlessly in my pocket. She claimed the compass was useless here because someone had tampered with the magnetic fields, though I suspected more that they planted devices or scattered metal debris to throw off any tool that might help me escape. As we walked, Mara spoke in low tones, her voice rough but steady. "They're not just hunters or survivalists. This isn't about food or sport. It's a game for them, control, power. The forest is their arena." I nodded, absorbing her words, the weight of them pressing down like the heavy air around us. "Why me? Why anyone?" She glanced over her shoulder before answering, eyes narrowing. "Because you showed up. Because you noticed. Because you didn't just wander blindly." We paused at a clearing where a fallen tree had been sawed off cleanly, its stump freshly marked. Mara crouched and traced the bark with her fingers. "They've been moving landmarks, cutting down trees that don't belong to this part of the forest, erasing signs. They want to disorient anyone who comes here." Her voice was bitter, edged with something I couldn't place: anger, fear, maybe even guilt. I swallowed hard. "How long has this been going on?" "Years," she said. "Long enough to build a system, traps, patrols, misinformation. They watch from hidden posts, listen for any sound. They're organized. Dangerous." A sudden crack from behind us made both of us spin, rifles raised. The forest was unnervingly silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves, but every noise felt exaggerated. Mara's eyes locked onto a figure slipping between the trees, moving with practiced stealth. "Stay close," she warned. The figure stepped into the clearing, a man, mid-30s, face weathered and grim. His eyes flicked between the two of us, calculating. "Who are you?" Mara demanded. He hesitated, then said, name's Ellis. I've been trapped here too, but I found a way out. You're lucky she found you first." He nodded at Mara, then me. I wanted to believe him, but Mara's grip on her rifle didn't loosen. "Why should we trust you?" Alice shrugged. "You don't have to. But you need to know something. There's a group controlling the forest from the old ranger station, near the North Ridge. If you want out, that's where you're headed." Mara exchanged a look with me, then nodded slowly. "We don't have much choice." We moved cautiously, guided by Ellis's knowledge, but the forest felt different now, more oppressive, as if the trees themselves were watching. Every snapped twig, every shifting shadow set my nerves on edge. The traps Mara warned about were real, wire snares hidden beneath leaves, pits disguised by brush. We avoided them by inches more than once. By midday, we reached a small stream, its water clear and cold. Mara knelt to drink, her hand steady despite the tension. I followed suit, but as I looked up, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure crouched behind a tree across the bank, rifle trained on us. "Contact," I whispered, heart racing. Mara cursed under her breath. "We need to move. Now." Alice pointed upstream. "There's a narrow path along the ridge. It's risky but faster." We scrambled up the bank, adrenaline pushing us higher. The path was steep and littered with loose rocks, forcing careful footing. Behind us, the sound of pursuit grew, branches breaking, shouts muffled by distance but close enough to set my teeth on edge. At the ridge's crest, we found the remnants of an old fire lookout, rusted metal frame half collapsed, windows shattered. Mara pushed forward, scanning for threats. "This is it," Ellis said, voice low. "The station should be just beyond." We moved with purpose, but the forest seemed to close in tighter. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching like fingers reaching for us. Suddenly, a hail of bullets cracked through the trees, forcing us to dive for cover. "Ambush!" Mara shouted, firing back toward the attackers. I scrambled behind a fallen log, heart pounding, trying to steady my breath. The attackers were well armed and coordinated, their shots precise. Alice returned fire, and for a moment, the forest echoed with the deadly exchange. Then, silence. Mara peeked over the log, eyes narrowed. "They're falling back, for now." I nodded, but my hands trembled. "How many of them are there?" "Too many," Alice said grimly. "They won't stop until we're dead or they have us where they want." The old station loomed ahead, a battered silhouette against the dying light. We had no choice but to make for it, despite the danger. As we approached, a sudden noise stopped us, cold, a low, guttural growl, unnatural in this place. Mara froze, rifle raised. What was that? Before I could answer, a figure stepped out from the shadows, another woman, younger, eyes wild and desperate. "Don't trust them," she gasped. "They're not who you think." The forest held its breath, the lines between hunter and hunted blurring in the fading light. And I realized with a sinking certainty that the nightmare was just beginning. It was the quiet that finally broke me. The younger woman, the one who'd appeared from nowhere, sat against the far wall, trembling. Her eyes darted nervously between us, distrust etched deep into every line of her face. Her warning lingered in my mind, "Don't trust them. They're not who you think." But who had I been trusting? Mara, Ellis, myself? The lines blurred, and my certainty cracked like the dry branches underfoot. I traced my fingers over the compass, still spinning wildly, useless. The map was nonsense now, the trails I'd memorized erased or rearranged like some cruel puzzle. The forest wasn't just wild, it was weaponized, manipulated by human hands to trap us, to break us. I felt the weight of that knowledge settle in my bones. This was no accident, no random misfortune. This was calculated. The younger woman, her name was Lena, she said, explained what she knew in a low, hurried voice. She was part of a group that had been hiding here, resisting the very people hunting us. It wasn't a simple matter of trespassing or poaching. The forest was a battleground for something far bigger. Land disputes, drug operations, and a twisted vendetta all tangled together in a web of violence and fear. She'd escaped the clutches of the hunters, but she didn't know how long she could stay hidden. Mara's rifle rested against the wall, her eyes sharp even in exhaustion. We need a plan. Sitting here won't keep us alive. Alice nodded slowly. We think the old logging road to the east might still be intact. If we can reach it by dawn, there's a chance to get out. I swallowed my fear and looked at the three of them, the strangers and companions who had become my lifeline. I realized then how much I had changed in these days, how the naive confidence I'd begun with was now tempered by a hard-earned caution. The wilderness hadn't just tested me, it had reshaped me. We moved quietly, leaving the lookout as the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon. The forest remained oppressive, but the morning brought a fragile hope. As we navigated the underbrush, Lena led us through hidden paths she knew, places where the hunter's eyes might not reach. The sun rose higher, revealing the scars on the land, felled trees, burned patches, and twisted wire traps. Each step was a reminder of the deliberate cruelty behind the manipulation of this place. But we pressed on, driven by the raw will to survive. At last, the logging road emerged, cracked and overgrown but unmistakably a way out. Relief flooded through me, sharp and sudden, but it was tempered by the knowledge that we were not yet safe. The hunters could still be lurking, waiting for us to falter. We moved quickly along the road, the forest gradually thinning. The distant hum of a highway reached our ears, a sound that felt like salvation. When we finally crossed the boundary between wild and civilization, I felt tears sting my eyes, not of joy, exactly, but of release. We had survived. Weeks later, I sat in a hospital bed, the sterile walls a stark contrast to the chaos of the forest. Mara and Alice were there, bruised but alive. Lena had disappeared, a ghost slipping back into the shadows she'd come from. We shared no grand celebrations, only quiet acknowledgments of what we'd endured. I thought about what I had lost, the innocence I carried, the simple faith in maps and compasses, and what I had gained, a sharper understanding of danger, trust earned through shared hardship, and a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. The wilderness had tried to break me, to erase me, but I had emerged from it changed, yes, but unbroken. And as I looked out the window at the city's bright lights, I knew I would carry the forest with me forever, its shadows, its silence, and the hard lessons whispered among the trees. The city hummed with an energy I hadn't noticed before, a constant pulse that both comforted and unnerved me. Streets bustled with people whose lives seemed so distant from the quiet struggle I had endured. Yet, beneath the noise, I felt a strange kinship with the city's own wildness, the unpredictable rhythms, the hidden corners where stories unfolded beyond the surface. It was a new kind of wilderness, one of steel and glass instead of pine and stone, and I realized that navigating this too would require the same vigilance, the same attentiveness I had learned in the forest. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself drawn back to the lessons carved into my mind during those long, cold nights. The forest's influence seeped into my daily routine, a patience in waiting for the right moment, a careful observation of people's gestures and expressions, a quiet confidence that didn't need loud declarations. I began to see my city with fresh eyes, noticing the nuances in its chaos, the delicate balance between order and disorder. At times, memories of the wilderness surfaced unbidden. The crackling fire under a star-studded sky, the smell of damp earth after rain, the distant howl of a lone creature piercing the night. Those moments were bittersweet, reminders of a world that felt both impossibly far away and deeply embedded within me. They grounded me, even as I worked to rebuild the life I had left behind. I sought out others who understood the pull of the untamed, people whose hearts beat in time with the natural world despite the concrete surrounding us. Conversations with them were like finding secret trails leading back to that primal place, a shared language of resilience and reverence. In their company, I wasn't merely a survivor of the wilderness, I was part of a continuum, a living testament to the enduring bond between human and earth. And so, the forest did not fade into memory as I once feared. It had become a foundation, a source of strength that shaped my presence in every step I took forward. The lessons of silence and shadow were no longer just survival tactics but guiding principles, reminders that beneath every surface lies a deeper truth waiting to be discovered, that to be truly alive is to embrace the unknown with quiet courage. In this way, the wilderness had rewritten the story of who I was, and who I might yet become. Story 5, Digital Doppelganger, when identity becomes a threat. I never thought much about the people who might be watching me. That morning, the sky was a dull gray, the kind of cold drizzle that clings to your coat and makes the pavement slick. I left my apartment around 7:30, the streets just waking up, the usual mix of early joggers and coffee runners. I liked this hour, the quiet before the city fully roused itself. The familiar dents in the sidewalk, the way the street lamp flickered outside the corner deli, the faint smell of roasted beans mixing with damp concrete. The office was on the 5th floor of a brick building that smelled faintly of old newspapers and machine oil. I slid my keycard through the reader and pushed the door open, the hum of fluorescent lights greeting me. My desk was exactly where I left it yesterday afternoon, papers stacked neatly, my laptop charging in the corner, a half-empty mug that probably needed washing. I booted up my computer and scanned through my emails with the efficiency of someone who'd rather not deal with surprises before the first cup of coffee. But then I noticed something odd, a message flagged urgent from one of the company's IT admins. The subject line read, "Account security alert, immediate action required." Normally, I have ignored it until later, but something about the tone made me pause. I clicked it open. "Dear Sarah, we have detected unusual login activity on your company account from multiple locations within the last 48 hours. For your security, please verify your identity by following the link below. Failure to do so may result in temporary suspension of access." I frowned. I hadn't logged in from anywhere but my laptop at home and this office computer. The message included a link, but I was cautious enough not to click immediately. Phishing scams ran rampant, and the wording felt generic. I decided to call IT directly instead. "Hey, this is Sarah. I just got an email about strange login activity on my account," I said when the tech support answered. After a few moments of typing in silence, the voice on the other end replied, "Yes, Ms. Palmer. We've noticed several attempts to access your account from locations in another state, Texas, to be precise. We've locked your account temporarily to prevent further unauthorized access." Texas? That was strange. I hadn't been there in years, and certainly not recently. Is there any way you can tell who it was? Or how they got my credentials? We're still investigating. In the meantime, we recommend you change all your passwords and monitor your personal accounts closely. Sometimes these breaches come from compromised email or social media profiles. I thanked the technician and hung up, my stomach tightening. I wasn't particularly paranoid, but this felt like more than just a minor inconvenience. I spent the next hour changing passwords, scanning my computer for viruses, and checking my bank accounts. Everything looked normal. No strange charges, no suspicious emails beyond the one from IT. Still, the sunlight outside felt colder somehow, and my usual calm was rattled. At lunchtime, I met up with Jenna, my coworker and occasional confidant, at the small cafe around the corner. She noticed my distracted mood immediately. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something weird happened with my work account," I said, stirring my soup absent-mindedly. "Apparently someone tried logging in from Texas. No idea who. Identity theft? She asked, eyebrows raised. I don't think so. I mean, not yet. But it's unsettling. She nodded. You should keep an eye on everything. Sometimes these things snowball before you even realize. I agreed but tried to shake it off. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. At home, I double-checked my social media profiles, looking for anything out of place. Nothing. My photos, my posts, they were all mine. Yet, a small, nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that this was just the beginning. Later that evening, as I locked my front door, I noticed a crumpled piece of paper tucked under the doormat. I hesitated, then picked it up. My name was scrawled across the front in uneven handwriting. Inside, a single sentence, "You're not as careful as you think." I looked around. The street was empty, the usual quiet settling in. My breath came out in little clouds, and my fingers trembled slightly as I stuffed the note into my pocket. The street lamp above flickered again, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers toward me. I wasn't sure who the note was from, or how they knew my name so intimately. But I knew one thing: someone had started watching me, and they weren't planning to stop. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a sudden chill, the kind that seeps into your bones long after the temperature has warmed. I told myself it was nothing. Just a prank. Just a weird coincidence. But deep down, I knew that whatever game had begun was going to change everything. And I had no idea if I was ready to play. The silence in the room grew heavy, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. I reached for my phone, fingers trembling, but no new messages appeared. Still, the unease lingered, a shadow crawling just beyond the edge of sight. The morning light felt wrong, too sharp, slicing through the blinds in harsh lines that made the room seem smaller, more confining. I finally got up, the floor cold beneath my feet, and moved to the kitchen. I poured coffee and sat at the table, my laptop open but untouched. The screen's glow was a weak comfort compared to the dark cyberspace where my life was unraveling. Whoever this person was, they weren't just content with screwing up my digital presence. They wanted me rattled, vulnerable. I called Sarah first thing, needing her voice, some anchor in the growing storm. She picked up on the second ring. "Morning," she said, voice light but cautious. "I found the note," I said, almost whispering. "Under the door last night. It says, 'You're not as careful as you think.'" There was a long pause. "That's serious. Did you call the police?" "I'm not sure what to tell them. It could be a prank, but it doesn't feel like one." "Okay. Listen, I can come over after work. We'll figure this out. You're not alone in this." That helped, a little. But the unease didn't lift. I spent the morning combing through every account, every password, every security question. I changed everything I could think of, activated two-factor authentication where it was available. Still, the feeling of intrusion lingered. Like the stranger had already slipped past the locks and was waiting in the shadows. Midday, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A voice, low and calm, spoke on the other end. "You're right to be careful. But you're still behind." The line went dead before I could say anything. I sat frozen, the phone slipping from my hand onto the table. It was the first direct contact apart from the note, and it felt like a confirmation. This wasn't random. This was personal. Later, when Sarah arrived, I showed her everything: the note, the strange call, the login attempts. We sat side by side, the laptop between us, trying to trace any clue, any pattern. "I ran your email through a few monitoring sites," she said quietly. There's been a spike in suspicious activity emails sent from your account, but not by you. Most are junk, but a few look like phishing attempts. My stomach tightened. So they're using me to spread their own mess. Seems like it. But it's worse. She pulled up a page on the screen. Look at this. It was a social media profile, almost identical to mine, same name, same photos, same personal details. But the posts were hateful, aggressive, full of lies about me. Someone was deliberately trying to destroy my reputation, and the fake account had thousands of followers already. I reported it, Sarah said. But these things take time. Meanwhile, people are seeing this and thinking it's me. I felt the walls closing in. How do they know so much? She sighed. That's what worries me. This isn't just about identity theft. They're obsessed. We talked for hours, planning next steps, contacting my workplace's IT department, alerting my bank, tightening security everywhere. But no amount of preparation felt enough. Every sound outside, every shadow in the hallway, seemed loaded with threat. That night, I double-checked the locks, peered out the window into the empty street, and found no comfort in the darkness. My phone buzzed again, another unknown number. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the message that came with it, a photo of the street outside my apartment, taken from a distance. And in the corner of the frame, unmistakable even in the grainy image, stood a figure watching. The game had just turned real. My heart thudded so loudly it seemed the figure might hear it. I scanned the photo again, searching for any clue. Was it someone I knew, or just a stranger with sinister intent? The grainy silhouette offered no answers, but the message was clear. I was being watched. I locked my phone, swallowed the lump in my throat, and pulled the curtains tight. The room felt suddenly smaller, the shadows creeping in from every corner, as if they too were complicit in this unseen threat. I wanted to tell myself it was a prank, some cruel joke played by a stranger or an acquaintance with a twisted sense of humor. But deep down, I knew better. The hours crawled by in a haze of restless vigilance. Every creak of the building, every rustle of leaves outside, made me jump. Sleep was a distant memory. At some point, exhaustion claimed me, and the darkness took me in its grip, but not before I set the ringer on my phone to silent and hid it beneath the pillow. Morning brought no relief. The street was as empty as the night before, but my nerves were frayed beyond repair. I decided I couldn't stay silent. I needed to tell someone who could help. I dialed the only number I trusted without hesitation, my best friend, Lisa. The line rang twice before she picked up, her voice bright and unsuspecting. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to break down, and recounted everything, the photos, the messages, the fear that had settled like a dark cloud over me. Lisa listened quietly, her tone shifting from surprise to concern. "You need to call the police," she said firmly. "This isn't something to mess around with." "I know," I replied, "but what if they don't take it seriously? What if this is just the beginning and I'm already too deep?" "We'll figure it out," she assured me. "But you're not alone in this." That promise was the first flicker of light in an otherwise grim reality. I knew the game had changed, but with Lisa's support, maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to checkmate the darkness stalking me. The next morning, I woke with a weight pressing down on my chest, heavier than the night before. I needed to see the police, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was different. I wasn't just a victim of online harassment anymore. Someone had crossed the line, and I was suffocating in the knowledge that they were close, too close. Lisa insisted on coming over. "We'll go together," she said, voice steady but firm. "You're not facing this alone." I agreed, though part of me worried that involving her would put her in danger too. But I had no choice. She arrived mid-morning, her face pale but determined. We sat at my kitchen table, the morning sun casting long shadows across the cluttered surface. I showed her the photo again, the blurry silhouette of the stranger, the message I'd received. Lisa frowned, leaning closer. "This isn't just stalking," she said. "It's targeted. Personal." "I know," I whispered. "But why me? Why now? What do they want?" Lisa shook her head slowly. "If someone's using your identity to ruin your life online, it's probably about control. About making you feel powerless." She paused, then added, "Have you noticed anything else? Any other weird messages, calls, anything out of the ordinary?" I thought back to the past few days, the random emails, the strange delivery I never ordered, the feeling of being watched. "There was that package," I said suddenly. "A box with nothing inside. Just a note with a date and time." Lisa's eyes widened. "Did you go?" I swallowed. "No." I was too scared. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We have to. If this is a game they want to play, we need to know the rules." Later that afternoon, we drove to the address on the note. It was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, dilapidated, with boarded-up windows and graffiti scrawled across the walls. The air smelled of rust and decay. My heart hammered as we approached the entrance. Lisa pulled out her phone, flashlight app ready. "We stick together," she said, voice low but steady. "No heroics." Inside, the darkness swallowed us. The floor groaned beneath our feet. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the silhouette from the photo lurking in the shadows. Instead, the warehouse was empty, eerily silent except for the distant drip of water. We moved deeper, guided by the faint light from Lisa's phone. Then, near the back, I spotted something taped to the wall, a collage of photos, clippings, and scribbled notes pinned to a corkboard. My breath caught as I recognized some of the images, pictures of me, taken from social media posts, snapshots from my apartment window, even a map of the neighborhood with certain locations circled in red. "This is insane," Lisa muttered, scanning the board. "They've been watching you for a long time." I nodded, my hands trembling. Among the photos was a crumpled printout of my stolen identity, social security number, account details, everything. But what caught my eye was a new addition, a photo of Lisa, taken just yesterday, standing outside my apartment. "Why her?" I asked, voice barely audible. Lisa's face paled. "Because they want to get to you through me." A sudden noise made us both freeze, a soft shuffling from the corner of the warehouse. Our flashlights darted toward the sound, illuminating a figure crouched behind some crates. Before I could react, a voice whispered, cold and deliberate, "You should have stayed hidden." The figure stepped forward, a man, younger than I expected, but his eyes held something far older and crueler. His smile was thin, almost amused. "I've been waiting a long time for this." Lisa grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the exit. But as we turned, the warehouse door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The game had just begun, and there was no turning back. The sudden slam echoed off the metal walls, sending a shiver through my spine. The dim light flickered overhead, casting long, erratic shadows that danced across the cracked concrete floor. The man didn't move, just stood there, watching us with that unsettling smile as if he were savoring every second of our panic. Lisa's grip tightened on my arm. "We need another way out," she whispered, voice tense. I scanned the room desperately. Stacks of crates towered like silent sentinels, but between them, narrow aisles hinted at possible escape routes. Yet, something told me this wasn't just about trapping us, it was a game of patience, of fear. The man took a step forward, his voice low but carrying a sharp edge. You don't understand what you're tangled in. It's not just about you two. What do you want? Lisa demanded, her eyes blazing despite the fear. He chuckled softly, a sound devoid of warmth. Answers. Retribution. And perhaps a little entertainment. I forced myself to stay calm, though adrenaline hammered in my veins. If you want answers, talk. But don't think threatening us will get them. He tilted his head, considering. Straight to the point. I like that. But first, you'll need to prove you're worth my time. With a swift motion, he threw a small device onto the floor. It beeped rhythmically. A bomb? A tracker? My mind raced. Step into the light, he ordered. Let's see if you're smarter than you look. Lisa and I exchanged a glance. No matter what came next, this night was far from over. The hunter had revealed himself, and we were already deep in his trap. The device's beeping filled the cavernous space, each pulse a jab at my nerves. Why are you doing this? I asked, keeping my voice steady even though every instinct screamed at me to run. What do you want from me? He watched me, expression unreadable for a long moment. Then he smiled again, that same thin line that made my skin crawl. It's simple, really. You've been living a lie. Someone else's shadow. Your real story has been buried under your stolen identity. And I'm here to bring it all into the light. Lisa shifted beside me, her eyes darting to the device, then to the closed door. You said this wasn't just about us, she said, voice low. Who else is involved? The man's smile twisted into something sharper, colder. People who matter. People who've been hurt because of your little masquerade. You think it's just a game, that this is some online vendetta? It's so much bigger. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The man's words confirmed what I feared. This wasn't random. Someone had orchestrated this, and I was just a pawn, or worse, a target. Walk me through it, I said, trying to buy time. What's your end game? He crouched down by the device, his fingers barely brushing it as he spoke. I want control. I want you to understand the consequences of your actions. Every lie you told online, every fake account you created, every life you ruined, you'll pay for it. I glanced at Lisa, who gave me a barely perceptible shake of her head. We needed a plan, fast. Suddenly, the device beeped faster, a high-pitched whine that made my ears ring. The man straightened up, his face tightening. 10 seconds, he said, voice low and urgent. Wait, I said, heart pounding. What happens if we don't move? He shrugged, as if it was obvious. You'll find out soon enough. Lisa grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the crates. This way, she whispered. We darted into the shadows, the beeping fading behind us, but the door remained shut. My mind raced. Was the device a bomb? A trap? The man's calm before the threat was terrifying. We slipped between crates, trying not to make a sound. Then, from the far end of the warehouse, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, closing in. The man was coming after us. I glanced at Lisa. We have to split up. Draw him away. Her eyes widened. No way. We stick together. We don't have a choice. I squeezed her hand, then broke into a sprint toward a narrow metal staircase leading up to a catwalk. The man's footsteps accelerated, echoing behind me. Reaching the stairs, I scrambled up, heart hammering. From above, I could see the whole warehouse, a maze of crates, shadows, and dead ends. Lisa was still below, hiding behind a stack, but the man was moving closer. I had to think faster. On the catwalk, a loose panel caught my eye. If I could dislodge it, maybe I could create a distraction, or worse, a barrier. My fingers fumbled with rusted bolts until I heard a sharp clatter as the panel fell, sending a cascade of metal onto the floor below. The man stopped, looking up. His smile vanished, replaced by cold fury. "Clever," he said. "But not clever enough." He pulled something from his pocket, a small remote, and pressed a button. The warehouse lights died, plunging everything into darkness. Panic surged through me. In the blackness, the man's voice was a whisper, but it filled the space between us. "This is my game. You're already losing." Then, the emergency lights flickered on red and strobing, casting everything in a hellish glow. From below, I heard Lisa scream. Without hesitation, I scrambled down the stairs, heart in my throat. Lisa was on the ground, clutching her ankle, eyes wide with pain and fear. The man stood nearby, watching us like a predator surveying his prey. "You should have stayed hidden," he said softly. I helped Lisa up, ignoring the sharp sting in her ankle. "We're not done yet," I said, voice steady despite the chaos. "You're going to tell me everything." "Why me? What do you want?" He laughed, a low, bitter sound. "You don't get to ask questions. You only get to play." Suddenly, the warehouse doors burst open, flooding the space with harsh daylight and the sounds of sirens. Police officers flooded in, shouting orders. The man's eyes flicked toward the noise, then back at me. "This isn't over." He slipped past the officers, disappearing into a narrow alleyway. I looked at Lisa, who was breathing heavily but still conscious. "They're here," I said, relief and dread twisting inside me. "But he's still out there." As the officers took our statements, I realized this was only the beginning. The stranger had shown his hand, he knew everything about me, and now he was playing for keeps. And the deadliest moves were yet to come. The night air grew colder, the city's distant hum masking the tension that settled over us. Lisa's eyes met mine, searching for answers I didn't have. "What does he want from you?" she whispered. I swallowed hard, the weight of secrets pressing down. There was no turning back now. Somewhere in the shadows, plans were unfolding, plans that would test every ounce of my resolve. I had to be ready, or everything would be lost. A sudden crash shattered the silence, pulling us back into the chaos. The morning after felt like a fragile truce. The police had taken our statements for hours, combing through every detail, every word the man had said or done. They assured us they were pursuing leads, checking surveillance footage, canvassing the neighborhood. But beneath their professional calm, I sensed the same unease I felt. This wasn't some random criminal act. This was personal. And it wasn't over. Lisa finally sat down opposite me, her eyes tired but resolute. "You need to tell me everything," she said softly. "About him, about what he did to you online, about why you think he's obsessed with you." I nodded, knowing that holding back would only give the stranger more power. "It started with the identity theft," I said. "He used my personal information to destroy my reputation online, fake profiles, ruined relationships, job offers pulled at the last second. I thought it was over when I changed my name, moved, started over. But he found me. And now it's like a twisted game for him." Lisa's gaze sharpened. "Why you? What did you do to make you a target?" I shook my head. "I don't know. Nothing that I can think of. It's like he picked me at random, but it's too deliberate for that. Maybe it's just a challenge, he wants to watch me fall apart." We sat in silence for a moment, the reality settling between us like a thick fog. I was caught in a trap, and every instinct told me the stranger wasn't done. But I refused to be his pawn any longer. "I'm going to fight back," I said, voice firmer than I felt. I'm done running. The next days became a blur of cautious steps and quiet vigilance. I changed my phone number, installed security cameras around the apartment, and even enrolled in a self-defense class Lisa recommended. The police presence around our building increased, but the looming shadow of the stranger's threat felt suffocating. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar face on the street set my nerves on edge. Then, one evening, the call came. Detective Ramirez, the lead on our case, asked to meet in person. We sat across from each other in a cramped office, the walls lined with pinned photos and case notes. "We've traced some activity," he said. "The man who's been stalking you, his digital footprint isn't clean, but we caught a break. He's been using burner phones, but one of them led us to a location. A rundown motel on the edge of the city." My heart pounded. "Can you catch him?" Ramirez hesitated. "We're coordinating a raid. It's risky, but we have to act before he slips away again." That night, I barely slept. The thought of facing him again churned my stomach, but beneath the fear was a flicker of something stronger, determination. If he wanted a game, I was ready to change the rules. The raid happened just before dawn. Police swarmed the motel, their radios crackling, boots pounding on cracked concrete. I waited outside, Lisa by my side, each minute stretching endlessly. Then, a squad car pulled up with a man in handcuffs, the stranger. As they brought him toward us, I felt a strange mix of relief and revulsion. His face was gaunt, eyes wild but resigned. For a moment, I caught a flicker of recognition, not just of me, but of the terrible loneliness that had driven him. Detective Ramirez approached. "He won't be able to hurt you anymore." But I knew the scars ran deeper than physical threats or stolen identities. The invasion of trust, the erosion of safety that was harder to repair. In the weeks that followed, the city began to feel less like a battlefield and more like home again. I returned to work, piecing together the fragments of my life the stranger had scattered. Lisa stayed close, her presence a steady anchor in the storm. Counseling helped me untangle the fear from reality, teaching me that control wasn't about never feeling afraid, but about facing that fear and moving forward anyway. I learned to lock the doors not out of paranoia, but as a way to reclaim my space. One evening, sitting on the balcony with Lisa, watching the city lights twinkle, I realized how much I had changed. The experience had stripped away my naivety, but also gifted me resilience I hadn't known I possessed. "I'm not the same person I was," I said quietly. Lisa smiled. "No, you're stronger. And you're not alone." I nodded, feeling the truth in her words. The stranger had tried to destroy me, to erase who I was. But instead, he had forced me to fight for my identity, my safety, my life. The nightmare was over, but the memory lingered like a shadow at the edge of the light. I would carry it with me, a reminder of the darkness humans could inflict and the strength it took to step back into the sun. As the city settled into night, I felt a quiet peace. The game was finished. For now, at least, I was free. I stepped forward, letting the cool breeze wash away the remnants of fear. The streets, once suffocating, now felt open, full of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring challenges, sure, but also hope. Each breath was a small victory, each heartbeat a promise to keep moving forward. In that moment, I understood. Freedom wasn't just an escape, it was a choice I would make every day. The stars above twinkled softly, guiding me toward whatever lay ahead. Story 6, Doppelganger Intrusion, Unseen Self at Home. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to sit through hours of grainy security footage, but there I was, perched on the edge of my worn-out couch, eyes bloodshot and fingers stiff from hours of clicking play, pause, and rewind. It was just past midnight, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor settling. It had started 2 days ago, on a Thursday. I came home late from work. Long hours at the law firm had drained me, and noticed the front door slightly ajar. Not enough to push it open, but enough that I could tell something was off. My pulse had spiked, but I convinced myself I'd just forgotten to lock up properly that morning. I double-checked the locks, ran my fingers over the door frame for any signs of forced entry, but found nothing. No broken glass, no scratches. Just that nagging feeling sitting heavy in my gut. The next day, I called the security company to retrieve the footage from the night before. The thought of someone rifling through my things, invading my privacy, unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I wasn't a particularly interesting person, no valuables, no enemies, just a quiet life with a job that left me little time for excitement. Yet here I was, staring at a screen, hoping for answers. The footage started around 11 p.m., the last time I remembered locking the door behind me. The camera outside the front porch showed everything in black and white: the empty street, the swaying branches, the empty driveway. Then, at precisely 1:17 a.m., the front door opened. And in stepped me. I blinked hard, convinced I had misread the timestamp. But no, the figure was unmistakably my height, my build, the same dark jacket and jeans I'd been wearing all day. The way the person moved, the slight limp in the left leg from an old injury, was identical. But I hadn't been home at that time. I was at my apartment, asleep, or at least trying to be. For a moment, I thought it was a glitch, some quirk in the system. But as I watched, the figure moved through the frame with deliberate, almost mechanical precision. It wasn't just entering the house, it was rifling through drawers, opening cabinets, pulling out items and setting them on the kitchen counter. Things I'd never leave out in the open. A small box of old photographs, a spiral notebook filled with scribbled notes, keys to a storage unit I'd almost forgotten I rented. I sat back, heart hammering. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Could someone have hacked into my security system and somehow inserted this footage? Could the figure be someone impersonating me? The idea seemed absurd, but the alternative, that I had no memory of being in my own home at that hour, was even more terrifying. I rewound the footage, watching the scene again, frame by frame. The figure glanced toward the front door several times, as if checking for someone outside. Then, after about 20 minutes, it disappeared from the frame, leaving the house empty once more. I checked the timestamps on my phone, cross-referencing with my emails and text messages. I had solid proof that I was elsewhere at the time. No gaps, no unexplained lapses. Yet here was this other me, moving through my home like a ghost. The more I stared at the screen, the more the room seemed to close in around me. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like someone had pulled back the curtain on a life I thought was mine alone. I wanted to shut off the computer, to pretend this was some elaborate prank or a trick of the light, but I couldn't look away. I dug deeper into the footage, scanning for anything else unusual. That's when I noticed it. The figure wasn't just going through my things. It was gathering specific items: my external hard drive, a USB stick I kept in the kitchen drawer, even the small safe tucked away behind a false panel in the living room bookshelf. Each time, careful and deliberate, as if it knew exactly what to take. I felt a cold sweat break across my forehead. Someone had not only broken in, they had been after something. And whoever it was had gone to great lengths to make sure I saw this. I sat there, alone in the dark, staring at my own face on the screen. The person moving through my house was me, but I wasn't the one doing it. And now I was left wondering how deep this went, how much of my life was still truly mine, and how much had been compromised without my knowledge. The screen flickered, and for a brief moment, the figure hesitated near the doorway, looking directly at the camera. It was a look that chilled me to the bone. Not a glance of fear or surprise, but something colder, almost deliberate. Then the footage ended. I shut the laptop with a snap, heart racing. The house felt colder, emptier somehow. I wasn't sure if I was more afraid of what I'd just seen or what was still out there, moving in the shadows of my own life. I needed answers. And I was going to find them. Grabbing my coat, I stepped outside into the biting night air. Every creak of the old porch beneath my feet echoed like a warning. Somewhere beyond the darkness, the truth waited, silent, watching, and far from finished with me. The morning light was a poor shield against the weight pressing down on me. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait for the nightmare to repeat itself. The footage had given me something I hadn't expected, a clue. The items taken, the hard drive, the USB stick, the safe's contents. I'd been careless with those, trusting my locks and my system's security. Now, that trust felt like a trap. The first call was to my neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell. She was the only person nearby who might have seen or heard something unusual last night. I needed to know if anyone had been lurking around, if there were footsteps in the gravel or lights flickering in the darkness. Her voice was cautious on the phone. I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary, dear. Though it was a quiet night, colder than usual. I did notice the street light at the corner was out again. You know how long it's been flickering? About a week, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Thanks, Mrs. Caldwell. I appreciate it. After hanging up, I sat back and stared out the window at the shadowed street. A broken streetlight wasn't much, but it was a start, a weak point in security, a place for someone to hide. I decided to check the house again, this time with fresh eyes. I walked through each room, tracing the path the figure had taken on the footage. The front door was locked as usual, but I tested it anyway. It was solid. The kitchen drawer where the USB was kept was ajar, something I hadn't noticed before. My pulse quickened. Had the intruder been here recently? Or was this left over from the break-in? I grabbed a flashlight and moved carefully to the bookshelf in the living room. The false panel was slightly loose, barely noticeable. I pushed it gently, revealing the small safe behind it. The door was open, the inside empty. Everything I'd stored in there, documents, backup drives, gone. I sank to the floor, the flashlight slipping from my fingers. The safe had been sealed tight. Whoever this person was, they had access beyond my understanding. I thought about the security system, the cameras, the alarm, the smart locks. They were supposed to protect me, but now I wondered if I was the one being protected or the one being watched. I called the security company's helpline. After navigating through automated menus, a calm voice answered. Thank you for calling Sentinel Security. How may I assist you today? I explained the situation as clearly as I could, trying to keep my voice from shaking. When I mentioned the footage showing me inside the house, doing things I had no memory of, the operator paused for a moment before responding. Sir, this is unusual. We have no record of any system breach on our end, and the cameras are encrypted with end-to-end security. However, we can schedule a technician to come by and conduct a full system audit. I agreed immediately, setting an appointment for the afternoon. If someone had hacked into the cameras or the locks, I needed to know. I couldn't live with the thought of a stranger, or worse, someone impersonating me, moving through my home at will. The hours crawled by. I couldn't focus on work or anything else. My phone buzzed twice, a message from my sister, Claire, checking in after I missed our usual weekend call. I hesitated before replying, not wanting to drag her into this mess, but I couldn't keep it to myself either. How are you holding up? She texted. Not great, I answered. Someone broke into my place last night. I saw myself on the security footage, but I swear I wasn't home. Her reply came quickly. That's terrifying. Have you called the police? I'm thinking about it. First, the security company is sending someone over. I need to understand what's going on before I involve them. She sent a string of worried emojis and then, I'm here if you need anything. I appreciated the offer. Claire had always been level-headed, the kind of person who could cut through panic with a few calm words. Maybe I needed her perspective. When the technician arrived, he was a man in his late 30s, with a steady gaze and a professional manner. He introduced himself as Mark and immediately set to work, connecting his laptop to my security system's main hub. Everything looks normal on the surface, he said after a few minutes. No signs of external hacking or remote access. But sometimes the intruders use more subtle methods like cloning devices or replacing hardware. He opened the panel beneath the security console. Have you noticed any strange behavior with the cameras? Flickering, delays, or interruptions? I shook my head. No, but the system logged out once last night when I was reviewing the footage. Mark frowned. That could be a sign of tampering. He ran diagnostics, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The tension in the room was thick. After about an hour, he looked up. I'm going to need to take the system offline for a thorough inspection. I'll also check the firmware for any unauthorized changes. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and dread. Taking the system down meant losing the security blanket, but leaving it running meant risking more intrusions. Mark packed up and promised to return in the morning with more equipment. I watched him leave, then locked the door behind him, double-checking every bolt. Later, I sat back down with my laptop, pulled up the footage again, and rewound to the beginning. This time, I noticed something I'd missed before, a shadow moving just outside the frame, lingering near the back door moments before the figure entered. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was there. My breath caught. Was this the real intruder? Or someone else? I zoomed in, enhancing the image as best I could. The shape was indistinct, too dark and blurry to make out features, but it was deliberate, watching, waiting. I leaned back, the knot in my stomach tightening. This wasn't just a break-in. It was a game. And I was the only player who didn't know the rules. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Stop looking. I stared at the words, cold and simple. The handwriting was digital, but the threat was unmistakable. I wanted to delete the message, to block the number and pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew they were right. I needed to talk with whoever was behind this, before it was too late. And worse, I was beginning to suspect they were already inside my life, maybe closer than I ever imagined. I woke the next morning to a silence that felt heavier than usual, the kind that presses down like a weight on the chest. I dragged myself out of bed and moved through the apartment like a ghost, the previous night's tension still clinging to my skin. The security system was offline, the monitors dark, a strange emptiness filling the small living room. I hadn't thought I'd feel vulnerable without the cameras watching the entrances, but I did. It was like leaving a door unlocked in a house you thought was impenetrable. I found a note slipped under the door. It was Mark's handwriting, neat and deliberate. Found something. Meet me at the coffee shop on 3rd and Main in 1 hour. Don't tell anyone. No explanation, no details. Just a summons. That was enough to pull me out of my fog. I grabbed my jacket and keys, slipping out quickly, locking the door behind me with an extra twist of the deadbolt. The coffee shop was small, a local joint Mark frequented, tucked between a laundromat and a dry cleaner. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in, and I spotted him immediately, head down, laptop open, a half-drunk cup of black coffee cooling beside it. Anything? I asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Mark didn't meet my eyes right away. He rubbed the back of his neck and exhaled slowly. Yeah. And no. It's complicated. I frowned. That's not very reassuring. He tapped at the keyboard, pulling up a file. Look at this. He spun the laptop so I could see. The screen showed a timeline of the security system's access logs. Every login, every command entered, every camera activated or disabled. It was a mountain of data, but one thing jumped out instantly. The system had been accessed remotely several times over the past week. Not just from my home network, but from IP addresses scattered across the city, some even out of state. Someone's been hacking into the system, Mark said quietly. Not just the cameras. They've had full control, turning feeds off, logging in and out, even moving the camera's angles. I swallowed hard. But how? I changed all the passwords. I don't use anything default. I thought this system was airtight. Mark shrugged. Nothing's airtight. Especially if they've got physical access, like someone inside your building, or someone close enough to intercept your Wi-Fi signal. Or, if your router's been compromised, they could be in the middle of everything. My mind raced. The break-in, the footage showing me entering my own home, was it possible someone had been watching me all along? Impersonating me? The idea was terrifying enough, but now the reality was sinking in. This wasn't just a random burglary. This was meticulous, calculated. Mark scrolled down the logs and pointed to a series of commands executed just before the break-in footage began. Look at this, someone disabled the motion sensors, then logged into the camera system, then triggered the door unlock remotely. They had your credentials, or at least enough to bypass everything. I felt a cold sweat break out across my back. Do you think it was someone I know? He looked up sharply. If it wasn't, they're good at blending in. Whoever this is, they've had access to your life, your devices, maybe even your routines. I thought about the message on my phone last night, "We need to talk." Stop looking. It suddenly seemed less like a threat and more like a warning. But from who? Mark closed the laptop with a snap. There's more. This morning, I cross-referenced the IP addresses with some public databases. One of them literally pings from 5 blocks away from here. The same neighborhood where your sister lives. My heart clenched. Emma. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks, too busy, too distracted. Could she be involved? No, that didn't make sense. She wouldn't do this, would she? I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. Maybe someone's spoofing the location. Mark nodded. Maybe. But there's one last piece. He pulled out a USB drive and handed it to me. This has the decrypted footage from the night of the break-in. But not just the cameras, you're going to see what the intruder did inside your home. It's unsettling. I hesitated, then plugged it into my laptop. The video opened, grainy but clear enough. The figure that looked like me moved through the rooms with purpose, opening drawers, rifling through papers. Then, something caught my eye. In the living room, the figure pulled out a small, black device from a drawer. It looked like a USB stick, but bulkier. Then, the figure moved to the router, unplugged it briefly, then plugged the device into one of the ports. It was a quick motion, but deliberate. That's when the figure looked directly at the camera. The angle changed slightly, as if the person noticed the lens. Then, slowly, the figure removed a mask. I blinked. A mask? The face beneath was mine, but not exactly. It was a perfect replica, down to the smallest detail, but with a slight difference in the eyes. The eyes were colder, emptier. Like a mask worn by someone who had studied me too well. I recoiled, heart pounding. This wasn't just a break-in or a hacker's prank. This was someone who had gone to terrifying lengths to become me, or at least, to appear as me. Mark leaned in. This explains the message. Whoever this is, they don't want you digging any deeper. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the table. But why? What do they want from me? From my life? Mark's eyes darkened. I don't know. But we're past the point of just watching now. They've crossed a line. And if they can do this once, they can do it again. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed, breaking the heavy silence between us. I looked up, my blood running cold. A woman stepped inside, scanning the room. Her gaze settled on me. She smiled too wide, too knowing. Mind if I join you? She asked, voice calm but with an edge I couldn't place. Mark tensed beside me. I realized then that this wasn't a coincidence. She knew about us. About everything. And just like that, the game had changed entirely. She slid into the seat across from me without waiting for an invitation, the bell above the door chiming faintly behind her. I'm glad you're still curious, she said, voice smooth, almost rehearsed, like a performer reading lines off a script. Her eyes locked onto mine, and there was something in the way she smiled, calculated, almost clinical, that made my skin crawl. You've been asking questions, poking around where you shouldn't. That's dangerous. I swallowed hard, struggling to keep my voice steady. Who are you? How do you know about all this? A faint laugh escaped her lips, but it wasn't amused. You might say I'm an interested party. Someone who wants to help you understand what's really happening. But first, you have to stop digging. They won't let you go any deeper. Mark's jaw clenched. You mean whoever's impersonating him? She nodded. Yes. And they're watching. Always watching. The words hit me like a punch. The idea that this person or these people had eyes everywhere, tracking my every move, made the nightmare feel all too real. My phone vibrated on the table. Glancing down, I saw an anonymous text, "Stop now. Or else." I glanced back at the woman, who didn't flinch. You're the one sending these, I said, voice barely above a whisper. Her smile grew sharper. I'm here to warn you. But if you don't listen, well, consequences will follow. Mark leaned forward. Why show up here? Why not just scare him off remotely, like you've been doing? Her gaze flicked to Mark, calculating. Because this isn't just a game. It's personal. You both need to understand that. I felt the cold knot in my stomach tighten. Personal? What do you mean? She hesitated, just for a moment, before speaking. You've been living a life built on secrets. Secrets they want to keep buried. And now, you're the threat. The words landed heavily. I thought about my job, the files I kept locked away on my laptop, the people I'd met over the years, the contacts I tried to forget. Had something from my past come back to haunt me? Or was this something new, something darker? Mark's voice broke through my spiral. We need proof. If you're serious about helping, show us something concrete. The woman pulled a slim envelope from her coat pocket and placed it on the table. Inside were a series of printed screenshots, emails, encrypted messages, and a photo of a man standing outside my apartment building. His face was obscured by shadows, but the timestamp was recent. This is just the beginning, she said. They're inside your life, your home, your work, even your friends. And they have a plan. You're running out of time. I looked up, the weight of her words pressing down on me. What kind of plan? Before she could answer, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from an unknown number. Mark grabbed it before I could react and answered, his voice tense. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end, then a distorted voice whispered, "Stop looking, or you'll lose everything." Mark's hand clenched around the phone. "Who is this?" The line went dead. I stared at the woman, who was already standing. "Remember," she said, voice low and urgent, "trust no one. Not even yourself." With that, she turned and slipped out of the coffee shop, leaving a trail of unease in her wake. Mark and I sat in silence, the noise of the cafe filling the void between us. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the walls were closing in. I realized now that this wasn't just about a hacked security system or a stolen identity, it was about control. And whoever was behind this had it in spades. That night, I double-checked every lock, every window. I unplugged the router and examined the black device from the footage, now in my possession, under a bright desk lamp. It was more sophisticated than I'd imagined, a tiny computer capable of overriding my home network and possibly more. As I reached for my phone to call Mark, a sudden noise downstairs froze me in place, a soft creak, barely audible, like a floorboard shifting under weight. My breath caught. The house was supposed to be empty. I crept toward the staircase, heart pounding in my ears. The darkness swallowed the hallway, but I could see the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains. Then, footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming up the stairs. I wasn't alone. And for the first time, I realized the threat wasn't out there, somewhere distant. It was inside my home. Watching. Waiting. The door to my bedroom creaked open. A shadow moved in the doorway. "Hello," a voice whispered, low, familiar, but wrong. I froze, every instinct screaming to run, but my legs felt glued to the floor. The face that stepped into the light was mine. But those eyes, they were empty. Cold. And they weren't looking at me. A slow smile curved on that pale, hollow face, twisting into something unnatural. "You've been hiding," it said softly, voice dripping with mockery. "But I always find what's mine." My breath hitched as the room seemed to close in, shadows lengthening around us like fingers. I wanted to scream, to fight, but the imposter took a step closer, and the air grew thick with menace. This wasn't just a visitor. It was a darkness I had invited in. The sun was barely up when I finally closed the door behind Mark. I sat heavily on the edge of the sofa, the weight of the previous night pressing down on me like a physical force. The image of that other me, stepping into the light with empty eyes and that slow, cruel smile, haunted every corner of my mind. How could someone mimic me so perfectly? How had I let this happen? Mark had called the police early, but the officers were cautious, more curious than convinced. The evidence was strange footprints that didn't match mine, the hacked security system, the device I'd found, but no sign of who had actually been inside or where they'd gone. The thought that someone had lived in my home, walked through my life and my skin, unsettled me more than any blunt threat ever could. I realized that the break-in, the impersonation, the control, it was all connected. Whoever had done this wasn't just after my belongings or my data. They wanted to erase me, replace me, to step into my life and take it over. And that was the scariest thing of all. The police promised to keep an eye on the case, but there was little they could do without a suspect or a clearer trail. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. I spent the better part of the day combing through every piece of footage, every log, every digital trace I could find. The device was my key, the tiny black box that had hacked into my network. I reached out to a cybersecurity expert, someone with the skill and patience to help me trace its origins. His name was Elias, a quiet man with sharp eyes and steady hands who promised me he'd do everything possible to uncover who was behind the intrusion. Waiting was agonizing. Every creak of the house made me jump, Every unfamiliar sound felt like a threat. But as the hours passed, I began to notice something else, a small shift inside me. The fear was still there, raw and real, but beneath it, a stubborn resolve was growing. I wasn't going to be a victim. Not anymore. When Elias finally called, I was sitting at the kitchen table, half-starved and jittery. He spoke slowly, each word measured. The device isn't just random. It's part of a much larger operation. Someone's been targeting you specifically. They used your digital footprint to create a perfect impersonation of your movements. It's sophisticated, but not impossible to track. He sent me a list of IP addresses, locations, and times. One stood out, a rented apartment a few miles from here. A place with no name attached, but plenty of activity. Mark and I went there that evening, nervous and unarmed but determined. The building was a tired block of flats, nothing fancy, nothing that screamed danger. But as we climbed the stairs, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled with a familiar unease. We knocked on the door of the apartment linked to the device's network. No answer. Mark tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small black box. The device buzzed faintly, as if alive. I pressed it against the door frame, and suddenly, a light flickered inside. The security camera system inside the apartment was active. Mark and I exchanged a glance. We weren't alone. Carefully, we slipped a credit card into the door latch, jiggled, and with a quiet click, it opened. The stale smell of dust and neglect hit us immediately. Inside, the apartment was a mess of wires, screens, and empty coffee cups. A bank of monitors flickered with static and grainy images, some of them from my own house. The place was a command center, a nerve hub. And then I saw him. A man, hunched over a keyboard, eyes fixed on a screen. He looked up as we entered, surprise flashing across his face, quickly replaced by cold calculation. I was wondering when you'd show up, he said, voice low and smooth. Mark stepped forward, fists clenched. Who are you? Why are you doing this? The man smiled, thin and sharp. You have something I want. Or rather, you are something I want. Your life, your identity. It's all so easy to take when you're careless with the digital world. I felt a surge of anger, rising up from a place I hadn't known was still capable of feeling so strongly. You don't get to do this. You don't get to erase me. He laughed, dry, bitter. Erase you? No. I'm just borrowing. For a while. But don't worry, I won't keep you waiting too long. Mark moved closer, voice steady. You're going to help us fix this. Tell us everything you know, or we'll call the police and make sure you never do this to anyone else. The man's eyes flickered, weighing his options. Then, slowly, he shut down the monitors and sank back into his chair. I'm sorry, he said quietly. But you opened a door you didn't understand. I'm just a consequence. We waited for the police together, the man silent and resigned. When the officers arrived, the conversation was long and complicated, but the weight lifted a little. The man's name was Daniel, a disgruntled former IT specialist with a history of hacking and identity theft. He targeted me because of a chance data leak I hadn't even known about, using it to craft the perfect puppet. In the days that followed, the house felt less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. I changed every password, installed new security systems, and even moved some of my most important files offline. But something else had shifted inside me, something deeper. I was no longer the same person who had sat frozen on the sofa, terrified of a shadow that wore my face. I was someone who had faced down the darkness, stared into it, and refused to let it win. Mark stayed close, our friendship tempered by fire and fear. We talked about boundaries, trust, and the strange, fragile nature of identity in a world increasingly ruled by code and screens. I realized I needed to reclaim more than just my digital life. I needed to reclaim myself. One evening, as the light faded and the house settled into quiet, I stood by the window, looking out at the city. The night was still, but I wasn't afraid anymore. The threat was human, fallible, and now contained. I had seen the worst of what people could do when given power over someone else's life, and I had survived. That survival didn't erase the scars, but it gave me something else, a kind of clarity. I understood now that control was an illusion, fragile and fleeting. What mattered was how you responded when it slipped through your fingers. I turned away from the window and walked back into the room, feeling the weight of the day lift with every step. The house was mine again, imperfect, vulnerable, but real. And so was I. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe.